All right, we are live with Iram of the Pillars, a savage one-shot. Why don't our intrepid players, our daring heroes, introduce themselves?
I'm Kyle.
Kyle, where are you from?
Oh, sorry.
Give us who you are and where you're from, and if you have any channel or product that you would like to plug, throw that in there as well.
Kyle from New York in the U.S., and I don't have anything to shill right now. So,
All right, this man is not a shill. What about you, Phil?
My name's Phil. I'm from southeastern Australia. Tonight I'll be playing novice historian, who I might name William Thompson. Um, I have nothing to shill either. Uh,
All right, perfect. So we have two honest men in the whole world. I didn't think there were two left, but we found them right here on YouTube.
we
So
found them on the internet.
we found them on the internet. Yes. So as we join our daring heroes be in the empty quarter of Arabia, they have made the long journey from Great Britain under the auspices of military intelligence of a government earned. For a young man named Adolf Hitler has come to power in Germany. He had previously been thrown out of the occult Thule society, but he has now reformed it. And in response, a special task force has been put together to stop this society from gathering magical might to the Nazi banner. So you have journeyed across the Mediterranean through the Red Sea and to this city, Aden in the Yemen. You journeyed over the mountains and out into the empty quarter, into the vast desert, which has long been the stronghold of the Bedou people, which has long been a region bereft of wealth or culture or civilization. And you have made this incredible journey across thousands of miles in this sweltering heat because you have heard a rumor, because you have it on good authority that the Thule Society is here, that a sandstorm has uncovered an ancient city, a city which may align with the position of the mythical Iram of the Pillars, a city mentioned often in both the Necronomicon and the Pancodic manuscripts and other occult tomes. So to keep whatever is buried in the desert from falling into the hands of evil men, you have come. So as we join you, you're probably on camelback. It's the most reliable form of transportation through this parched and scorching landscape. There's a sea of sand all around you, the bright light of the sun, not a cloud in the sky. This is a land bereft of rain. Please describe what your characters look like and introduce them to our viewing audience. How have they found their journey to this point so far?
Percy Wilkinson is wearing something that he feels a little bit out of comfort with, sort of to meet the need of the environment he's found himself in. He's wrapped himself in sort of loose-fitting robe type clothing that allows him to stay out of the sun, but hopefully keep as cool as possible at the same time. He's hunched low over the camel and has been grumbling for the past several hours, quite dissatisfied with where he's found himself, his lot in life, and even a little bit with the crown who's sent him here sort of against his wishes.
All All right, and what about William Thompson? What does he look like? How has his life brought him to the back of this stinking beast of burden?
Middle-aged man, very proper, dressed in appropriate, correct British style, not these primitive yokels. Opportunities like this for a man who seeks history and knowledge don't come up very often. So when given an opportunity to investigate for the crowd, he had to jump at it. And while I'm not thrilled to be here, not thrilled, it's just not an opportunity you can let go.
All right, excellent. Now, according to British intelligence, the Thule Society has not been able to secure this more direct route into the empty quarter. They have had to instead come through Oman and come through Muscat, which is actually a city that bears a close resemblance to Aden, but it is on the opposite side of the empty quarter, the opposite side of Arabia, and you're hoping that your shorter route will give you a head start over them. So you have with you a map secured by British intelligence, which is supposed to lead to this location which aligns so well with the descriptions in the Necronomicon. And you are, of course, not alone. In addition to the two of you, there are 4 other members of your party here on Camelback. There's, of course, an archaeologist from Miskatonic University, Ed Stokes, a spy from British intelligence, Alan Simmons, an occultist, formerly freelance, although he had at one point worked at Miskatonic University before being disbarred for his occult leanings, which is Bernie Serrano, and a bodyguard, a veteran of the Great War, Scott Pickett, a very soldierly gentleman. So you're all on Camelback, wearing the light, loose clothing. I believe that in addition to yourself, Percy, probably only Alan would be wearing any kind of burnous, of thobe, of desert garb. Everyone else dressed in a more proper British style.
I don't really understand how they could do that. It's blistering out here.
It is indeed. The sweat dripping down your brow, falling into the fur of your camel, and you can't believe this huge furry creature could not die of heat stroke, and you can't believe that anything that's still alive could smell so bad either. But as you were journeying, Kyle, how much does the rest of the party know about Percy's history? Do they know about how he's been pressed into service? Surely Alan Simmons, the spy, he knows. But what about the others?
I would say that Percy's been quite open about it because he's got a huge mouth and he's just been griping nonstop since they've left Britain. So yeah, I would say everybody's pretty aware of the fact that he was pressed into service for one too many B&Es. The intelligence service thought that that skills could be put to more constructive uses.
All right. And what does William Thompson think of this? Having this thief, this criminal, accompanying their official mission and investigation?
We're surrounded by thieves and criminals. What's one more? As long as we get where we're going, and I can record what's there, I'll put up with it. The same as I put up with the heat and the camel.
too
right.
kind, Billy. You're too kind, Billy boy.
Do not call me Billy.
Bill.
I think it's pronounced billion.
And indeed, as you're journeying, Bernie Serrano, the occultist, the former professor of folklore at Miskatonic, has taken quite a shine to our good thief, to Percy Wilkinson, remarking to him that you should be most welcome on this expedition, as we are all thieves seeking to steal knowledge from the desert, seeking to steal power from the enemy.
Look, Bernie, if I can come away from this with a few extra coin and not go to jail when I get home, I'd be just thrilled.
You can see a particular exception to this in the form of your archaeologist, of Ed Stokes, as he's taken umbrage to your being included in this. As you shouldn't compare all of us to this man. We may be allies, but that does not make us friends, and it does not make us two of a kind. And he kind of glares at both of you. He is in good standing at Miskatonic, so he's not happy that the former professor who's been thrown out is here, and as, of course, a well-respected member of society. He's not happy that Percy Wilkinson is here. But Bernie just kind of looks over at Ed and remarks to him, "What is an archaeologist but a thief? You simply wait longer than most after your victims have departed."
Percy
and
just
Ed just
shrugs.
scowls at him and giddies his camel up to kind of pull away from the occultist.
As he's moving away, Percy just kind of shrugs and goes, "Yeah, what he said," and indicates at a Bernie.
And do you have any input on that exchange, Phil? William Thompson?
Yeah, I'd write up to Ed Stokes and I would say, do not worry about what these people say. The lessons of the past are the property of their future, and what we do here is extremely important.
Ed nods at you, clearly having in this respect, a great deal of respect for you. And he says, if it was not important, I doubt either of us would be here.
Very true.
You can still sense some of that latent animosity that archaeologists and historians often have against one another. One dealing in hard evidence and facts, and the other dealing in the eyewitness accounts and reading between the lines of those accounts. And archaeologists and historians have many and storied disagreements about what really happened in the past. Let me ask as well, William, which university do you represent, or are you a freelance?
I haven't really thought about it. Let's say
You could certainly be a gentleman historian, and it's more of
I like that one.
a hobby for you as a dilettante.
I like that one. Let's go with that.
All right. So as you are progressing, it's been many days and nights out on the hot sand in the open desert. You're trying as much as possible to sleep during the day and travel at night. Night is safe. Night is cool. And night, in this case, is easier to navigate. During the day, one horizon is much the same as the next in the deep desert. There's sand and dunes and sand and not a whole lot else besides that. But at night, the stars are guiding your way. And Alan Simmons, your spy, your military intelligence officer, as he'd prefer you to call him, consults with Bernie Serrano, with Ed Stokes, as they try to determine their position based on the position of the stars. And they generally seem to be able to reach consensus on that. So you certainly can feel good in that aspect, that you don't think you're completely lost out here, although it's, again, very hard to tell at times in the endless sand dunes. But as you are traveling, traversing, climbing one dune, descending it, climbing the next, descending it, and moving the horizon ever closer, although it is ever unchanging in the sweltering heat, you do see something on the horizon. At first, it seems like a black spot, like a hill, like a dune that is perhaps taller than the others. And there's a general feeling of excitement in your group as you spot this. You don't know what it is, but based on the position of your map, you think that it could be your destination, this city that's been uncovered by the shifting sands, the wind of the desert. So how do you approach this, or do you make any comment to your companion as you approach?
I think that Percy wouldn't be totally paying attention to all of this. He's just kind of got his head down on his camel. Occasionally he sips up and drinks probably too much water for how much they probably have to be rationing, and then goes back to just grumbling into his saddle. So as he rides along, he sort of just continues going, even if the rest of the party stops. They would have to call him back to get him to rein in his camel.
All right, well, Percy seems like the kind of guy who would bring some whiskey just in case he runs out of water. So
Absolutely.
I'm sure he'll be fine.
That's hydrating, right?
Sure. What about William Thompson?
I think he'd be grateful just to see some change in this never-ending sea of blasted heat and bastard dust.
Absolutely. So you're drawing closer, your camel's trudging forward. You can start to make out these sky-thrust pillars. You can make buildings. It's all, the color of the sand. It's blending in very much so. So it is difficult to make it out. You see it coming from such a long way off in this terrain, in this landscape. It's perhaps hours and hours of riding rather, before it really starts to take any kind of noticeable shape. But it certainly looks like something is just poking up out of the sand, like something that has been long buried. And your companion, the occultist, Bernie Serrano, will be very quick to point out to you all that if the legends are correct, if they hold true, then these ruins are more ancient than humanity itself. And at this,
I was just going to say that is preposterous. If they're older than humanity itself, then who put them there? Did they just spring up out of the ground?
And the other, pretty much everyone else there, other than Bernie, I know, looks at him like he's been like this the whole time, so they know he's not all there. but it's just one thing after another with this guy. And as you speak up, they kind of nod in agreement, maybe even roll their eyes as if like, why do you even bother correcting this lunatic?
Percy has heard the conversation, but hasn't actually paid attention to the content of what's being said. So he finally just kind of looks up from his saddle and goes, "Christ, is that it?"
And Bernie kind of looks back at you and says, "It was supposedly an elder race. This, if it is Iram, this was a coastal city. And as the ocean receded over the course of 1,000 years, they were faced with their own doom here in the parched and blowing sand."
And me mum's the Queen of England. Can we get on with it already?
And indeed, getting on with it, you do move forward ever closer, and you finally start to see some concrete shape coming to this structure. There seems to be a arched rooftop coming up, poking its way up out of the sand, and many pillars surrounding it. And you think as you come closer, you can see smaller rooftops buried as well, just barely jutting out. That this may have been the very peak, a pinnacle of some enormous palace or temple. You get the feeling that this structure was not at ground level upon construction, that it may have soared stories above whatever city it capped as the pinnacle. But as you're getting closer and you see that architecture, the cyclopean masonry, sand choked, sand blasted, you also see another large structure. This one much more conventional in shape. This one with just slightly sloping sides and a peaked roof. This whole structure fluttering in the breeze. You realize it's a tent, a large pavilion is anchored here next to this sand-blasted ruin. And you can see as you're coming closer just that glint of color. And it appears that on one of the anchors, on the main anchor to the front of this tent, there's a flag waving in the wind. There's red and white and black. And you have no doubt in your mind as you're coming closer that this is the swastika of the Nazi party. So what do you do? There's a tent next to the ruin flying the Nazi flag.
Do you think that's our German friends?
Yes, I do believe they have beaten us here. This does not bode well.
Well, I could always sneak in for a closer look if that sounds fine with you lot.
So looking at you, Alan Simmons, the spy, your British intelligence agent, certainly seems somewhat taken aback by this. He's actually quite a young man, but he's probably the first to drop off his camel, and he gestures to everyone else to do the same. He said, "They may have seen us, fellas, but then they may not have seen us either. I think that you're right, that someone needs to sneak ahead, Percy, and you're certainly the best equipped. If we can get the camels behind that tall dune over there, any of us with the will to do so can sneak ahead and scout out the situation."
Well, I am not keen on going just by myself. but you're a spy, right, alley boy? Why don't you hop off your camel and leave it to the intellectual sort, and you and I'll go up for a quicker look.
Sounds like a plan.
So Percy hops down and just kind of tosses his reins at whoever's closest. Doesn't really pay attention if they're grabbing him. And he looks over at his camel and kind of spits in the sand at its feet and moves off.
All right, you give water to the desert, a blessing. And you can see that your companions, that Bernie and Ed and Scott certainly seem a little bit more hesitant. Scott does have a rifle that's he's been hauling around. You know, it's on the back of his camel, basically, but he has been keeping it clean and probably in the hope of not needing to use it. But just in case, you know, he's a pretty good shot with that rifle. How are you guys armed and equipped? And what is there any further detail you want to add to your description as you're moving forward?
Percy's brought along his brass knuckles from one too many street fights because he didn't know what else to throw in his bag. And he's got a 38, a Webley pistol that he's been given that he's fairly familiar with. He's fired similar firearms before, but he's not been like extra careful to make sure that the sand and everything stays out of it, being fairly lazy and more prone to punching rather than shooting. And he's had his face covering up on his hood and has left it there because it sort of blends in with the sand, but mostly because he just doesn't want the blowing sand in his face. He's got enough to complain about already.
All right. And what about William?
Not so much prepared for combat. The only unusual thing that I might be carrying would be my journals, my ledgers, to record whatever we might find. And just the normal stuff that you'd kit yourself up with to go walking across a desert, you know, just water bottles and I don't know if I could have potentially binoculars or something like this, that type of thing.
All right, excellent. And does William volunteer to go along with Percy, or does he stay with the camels?
Oh no, we have criminals to sort this stuff out. That's don't
All right.
touch anything.
Right. You stay behind and do all the thinking.
Better that I do it from back here than you at all.
All right. So you can
Percy
see,
just kind of sends a rude gesture his way and turns to carry on.
So you can see Alan kind of nod his head and say, well, who else is coming? And Ed kind of speaks up, says, well, I didn't come all this way for nothing. I figured in all this sand-blasted wasteland, it'll be easy enough to crawl across these dunes. And the occultist and the soldier, you know, they both nod their head. Scott speaks up and says, if there's any action to be had, I'd rather be there. And Bernie puts in his 2 cents as well, saying, only one man is needed to watch these beasts. Watching history unfold and be uncovered is my means. So it looks like everyone wants to go and leave you alone holding the camels. Does William object to that plan at all?
Oh yeah, as soon as Stokes puts in that he's going to go, I'd want to go straight up. I'm not letting him go before me, and I'd be something like, better that I could record it than have you crush it with your picks and your shovels.
Percy's just kind of looking at this, especially looking at Bernie and Ed and William, and he's a bit incredulous. He's like, well, I guess we'll all foul it up together then.
Well, Stokes will actually look at you, William, and say, well, someone has to stay behind and look after these camels. I suppose if you're going to be that way about it, I'll keep you company, and we'll let everybody else sneak off.
Great, it's sorted, and then he turns to Bernie and continues to glare at him. Kind of like, really, you think you can be sneaky enough to do this?
Well, unless you actually say anything, Bernie will certainly accompany. He's kind of airy and mystical, and he doesn't really pay attention to people.
After not getting a response from glaring at him, Percy just walks up and like grabs him by the cuff and drags him over to Ed and William and like sets him down in the sand and goes, "Watch this, will you?"
And at this, Ed kind of makes eye contact with you, William, and nods. He says, "Good idea. Bernie can watch the camels." And he turns and starts following you guys. So do you go after him then, William, and you leave the occultist to watch the camels?
Yeah, I do.
All right.
One step ahead.
All right.
Percy throws his head back and just kind of lets his arms fall to his side and walks off, following everybody.
We're all going to die here.
All right. So make a stealth test as you were attempting to sneak up on this German encampment, this Nazi encampment, in fact. So again, whatever your dice code is, roll that type of dice. So if our soldier is a D4, I'll roll my D4 here. And if you hit 4 or higher, you've succeeded. 4 is the magic number. And as heroes, you also get a D6. So you take the higher. Any roll you make, you roll your dice code, and you also roll a D6. You take the higher of the two. And a success is simply 4 or higher. 4 is the magic number.
And what's stealth-based?
Stealth, if you don't have stealth as a skill, roll your agility.
I think untrained is D4 minus 2, if I remember correctly.
I thought you could default to the skill, but you still get minus 2. Is that
might be it. I don't remember.
I could be wrong.
I don't care. We can go either way.
Since we're pulpy, I might default to the skill, to the attribute minus 2. So your agility minus.
Yep, that works for me.
Actually, Kyle, I think you're right. I think it's just a D4 minus 2, but you still get your D6 also going to be minus 2 as well.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. If we care to follow.
Dick, I told you I need your help. So if you're untrained, roll a D4. You always roll your D6 as well. Take the higher, but you're minus 2 to whichever one is higher.
And I'll do 2d6 because my stealth is d6.
Yep.
So I got 2 5s. So okay. I guess I succeed, but.
Very good. Does that make sense, Phil?
Yep, D4 and a D6. I'm just trying to figure out how to work this roller. Did that do it?
There you go.
There you go. So you got a 5 on your wild die. That's a success. You beat the 4. 4 is the magic number.
Okay.
So the 5 of you are stalking forward across the dunes, making sure profile above those undulating of sandy hills that make up this desert. And you're crawling closer. You're sneaking closer. There's a certain amount of tension as you certainly realize, especially you, Percy, that Not all your companions are very stealthy. Certainly, your intelligence officer, Alan, very stealthy. But Scott Pickett, Ed Stokes, not so much so. Still giving them hushed directions, keeping them in line, down, low, behind you. You think you've done a pretty fair job of coming up on them, especially since this camp will have no idea which direction you're coming from. And the horizon 360 around is all just undulating dunes. You're in the middle of nowhere. So as you're sneaking forward, crawling up on these dunes to get a view down, you start to notice there's something not quite right about this encampment. You haven't seen any people moving about, and it's taking you some time to crawl forward, to move with this stealth. You haven't seen any lookouts, any perimeter guards. You haven't seen anyone coming out to investigate the ruin itself. And now that you're getting closer, can you all make notice tests?
There's just one central tent, right?
Yes, you only see one tent. There may be a few other like small lean-tos, which are basically just like piles of equipment with a canvas pinned over them. So they're
Okay.
clearly not a tent, clearly not something a person can be inside of. But you do see perhaps a few of those as well.
Okay, so I think if I'm kind of leading this effort, I'd like to guide everybody towards the back of the tent, the proper tent, so that we're not approaching right at the entrance. And I bombed my notice test. I got nothing. As far as I know, there's sand. There's definitely a lot of sand and some tents, or in a tent.
What about you, Will?
You're still on mute.
I don't notice anything except for this huge architecture looming out of the sand.
Yes, it is very distracting. And indeed, you see those pillars, are carved all the way around with mosaic designs. It's similar to some Persian columns that you've seen before. Of course, this is hundreds of miles away from Persia. But it's not exactly Persian. It's just the closest that you've seen. It is indeed an architectural style that is completely unknown to you. And that's reason enough to be distracted, certainly. And you can see as well that Ed is also most distracted by this. But of course, now did you say you had binoculars as well?
Yeah, if I can, Dan.
If you're using binoculars, I think you should get like a +2, in fact, which I think does put you at a success. Phil, and I don't know, Kyle, if you think, at any point, if either of you think you would have any equipment that your character would have brought, please just assume that he did bring it with him.
Okay.
So do you think that Percy would have brought any binoculars or a telescope or anything like that?
He mostly brought stuff to smash his way into things or pick locks. That's kind of his bag.
Hang on. Excuse me, guys.
Sure.
Okay.
I do have the scavenger edge, so at some point during the session, I can sort of magically pull out whatever seems interesting.
All right. We'll just give Phil a moment here. We'll have a very brief intermission. I might actually put my kettle back on if he's stepping.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Oh, did we lose him?
Looks like it. He must have dropped somehow.
Okay. I've
I
done
ran to
that
grab a
before
drink
too.
I don't know where he went.
Okay. I've done that before too. You go to hit, like, you go to unmute yourself and you accidentally hang up.
Yep.
I've done that before.
There he is.
Sorry, guys.
No problem.
Welcome back.
Did we all die?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Hey.
Percy tripped on a scorpion.
Ooh.
Right. Shit.
So looking forward through those binoculars, you managed to take your eyes off of the architecture and just scan through that tent. You can see it flapping in the breeze, but you can also see the sand kind of piled up around the tent. It's drifting actually into the mouth. The door of the tent is choked with sand, as if no one has passed through it. No one's cleared it out, perhaps in days. So it looks almost like it's been abandoned to the weather. You can see a few of the lines securing it to the ground have come loose as well. So it's looking very bedraggled and deserted in this encampment.
And I turn to my colleagues and whisper, "It appears that no one's been there in a long time. Look at the way the desert swallows the tents and gear, whatever the gear word is."
Percy looks a little bit grumpy that he didn't spot this himself, so he kind of yanks the binoculars away from William, and he starts to scan around, and he goes, "Yes, I noticed as well."
Right. And you can see briefly Alan and Scott kind of put their heads together, and they say something, and Alan pulls a tiny pistol out of his pocket and kind of leans over, and he just pulls the trigger. He shoots up into the sky, and there's this deafening boom, and it just echoes out over the desert, the gunshot ringing out. You can see Scott has his rifle trained on the tent, just waiting to see if anyone comes running to investigate that gunshot. And he waits and waits and waits, and no one emerges from the tent. And again, Alan and Scott look at each other. They look back at you. There's a lot of confusion on their faces at that point.
Percy kind of shrugs and goes, "I used to do the same thing back in England. I'd throw a rock through the window just to see if anybody came out."
And Scott kind of like shakes his head as if he's using ungentlemanly tactics. And Scott will stand up. Let me just get Scott here. That's, of course, his service picture. He's not dressed in uniform. He's plain clothes. But he is quite a young man to have served in the Great War. And he served just at the tail end. But he stands up from your hiding place where you're nestled on the edge of that dune. And you start to walk down. He starts to walk down with his rifle, ready, trained, prepared at any moment to spring to the side to bring his gun to bear. But he seems to have had it with this waiting and stalking business.
Percy jumps right up and draws his .38 and follows along and actually catches up to him and sort of puts his hand on his shoulder, and as they get near the tent, and gets him to stop and shush. And then he just fires all 6 rounds of his revolver into the tent's canvas, kind of in a line across it, and then starts reloading kind of nonchalantly and just looks at Scott and shrugs.
Scott just looks at you and shakes his head like, "Why didn't I think of that?" if only we were using regular Call of Cthulhu, I'd make you roll luck to see if you hit anything you should hit. But Savage Worlds has no luck mechanic. which is one of the best mechanics in Call of Cthulhu, in my opinion.
I know, I love the luck roll.
Yeah. But Scott just, why didn't I think of that? And he kind of almost smiles like, okay, you got some tactics, some use to this expedition. And then he kind of continues stalking forward. What are you doing as these two are advancing, William?
Look, as soon as the element of surprise was gone and no one came out, I'd like to approach these pillars and have a look at this writing, see if I can't make head or tail of it.
All right. So yeah, the two of you then will be, that is to say, Scott and Percy will certainly be leading the way. Everyone else following behind some distance off. William kind of gets sidetracked as you start to pass through these pillars. And Scott's kind of using them for cover as you're moving forward, just out of instinct, out of habit, perhaps training. But there's quite a few of them. It's almost like this forest of pillars that you're moving through, and at the center, that great arch. And it's not far off that the tent is located. And here and there, other rooftops projecting just out of the sand, just visible, just hinting at the architecture, the city layout. So, as you're moving forward, Percy, how do you approach the tent? Do you let Scott go first, or are you the first one through?
I think that Percy motions for Scott to move towards the actual front flap of the tent, being that I would think anybody would have come out by now. And Percy, though not one to take all the risk for himself, moves along to the side of the tent, and as he waits for Scott to enter, Percy sort of waits to pull up the side of the tent and make his way underneath the canvas.
All right. Yes, and Scott does so. So he pulls up the flap, and kind of like has his rifle trained, stuck under his arm. You can see, the interior of the tent as he's holding the flap up, and it does look like it's been exposed to quite a bit of sand. There are like sand drifts across the floor of the tent there. You can see that there are. It's quite a large tent, so it's about probably about 30 feet long and like 15 wide. It's very, very large, which is why you thought that it was a building from the distance. It's pretty low. It's only about 6.5 feet in the center, and then it's got a downward slope from that center point on the roof. But you can see they've got some beds set up in there. There's a table set up as well. And it's on the table. You can see some equipment, what looks like a radio, some books. You can see several foot lockers laying around. The chair to the table is tipped over on the ground and kind of starting to get buried in sand. The beds are unmade. There's blankets tossed around, pillows. The foot lockers are somewhat in disarray, a few of them. You can see some personal items strewn about as well. So it certainly looks in disarray, but you don't see any sign of a person as you're coming into that tent.
So Percy, kind of falling back into his old ways for a minute, puts his revolver away and starts making his way towards the footlockers. And he looks at Scott and goes, "You do whatever you've got to do. I'm going to start looking for anything worth nicking."
All right, he just frowns, shakes his head at you, and he kind of steps back out of the tent and whistles and waves. It says, "It's all clear, guys. There ain't nobody home."
And Percy is just like upending footlockers if he can get into them. He's just dumping them out and kind of kicking them around with his shoe, whatever the contents are.
All right. So it's not long before Alan comes into the tent as well. Ed is probably just as interested in the pillars as you are, William. And, he starts moving as well. Hearing the all clear, like he does have a small pocket revolver, so he was ready to try to help. But hearing the all clear, he pockets that, and he comes out with a notebook and a pencil, and he immediately starts going to work as well on the pillars, trying to get those bas reliefs, trying to figure out exactly, who left this ruin here. Give me one moment. I'm just going to pull up your sheets here, because it's just been a while since I've actually run Savage Worlds. Oh, I don't even think I have your sheet. I'm just trying to think if it would be notice to ransack those lockers, or if it would be a different skill. I think it's notice, isn't it?
Yeah, it'd be a toss-up for me between notice and investigation. I have notice, I don't have investigation.
All right. Well, hit me with a notice test, and William, if you can hit me, I think it would be a knowledge test. But if you can think of a better skill test to examine those pillars with, please use that.
Knowledge is good.
Yeah, I think with your sheet, knowledge is really good. You got like a D12 knowledge.
I've got a scholar gives me a +2 on knowledge.
You got a D12 +2 knowledge. So you're pretty much the most knowledgeable man in this hemisphere, probably.
I got a success on that notice.
All right. And what do you have, William?
I've got an 11. No, I don't. +2, I've got a 13. Now, just because I beat 4 multiple times, is that a rule? Was I reading?
Yes, that's it's called a raise. When you beat a DC, which is almost always 4 to begin with, but when you beat any DC by 4 or more, it's a raise. So with your 12, I believe that's a double raise, in fact. And I don't think there's any specific rule about being a double raise being much better than a raise, but I always treat it as such. So we'll probably describe what you think you can tell. I mean, there's certainly decorative columns. You don't believe they ever supported any roof. You do see some knobs on some of them near the bottom, which indicate they may have held beams. So there may have been some kind of network of wooden beams, possibly stone, less likely, but possible, that have crumbled away, that have faded away into the desert, or possibly that are simply buried. So it's certainly a highly decorative architectural style. And examining those carvings, which is almost like a bas relief, and they seem to spiral up, and they immaculately blend one stone into the next, as if it were one enormous piece of stone rather than multiple stacked blocks making up these columns. And you can see that it depicts serpents and birds and fish, a lot of animal patterns. So not geometrical design that you might expect from certain cultures like ancient Greece, but certainly very animistic in nature. And the serpent is certainly a recurring motif. As you're looking at it, you can see the serpents carved to coil up these pillars. A few of them retain serpentine capstones, the head of a serpent perched at the very top of these pillars, as if this were a forest of standing snakes. And you can see that Uh, they're all looking out, looking away from that central structure, that curved edifice, which is now half buried or more in the sand. This certainly appears to have been the center of the city. And as you're moving, you think that the entire city may have had a spiral pattern out from that central structure. That the pillars certainly seem to support that. It's almost a spiraling pattern out from that, with all of the serpent heads facing away from the central location, looking to the outside, on guard, protecting of whatever sacred treasure may have been there. Whether that's the palace, the home of the ruler, the temple, the high priest, you can't really say at this moment.
And these animals, they're not necessarily desert animals, so these were here before the sands rolled over?
Well, there certainly are depictions of fish among the serpents, yes, and birds as well, and seabirds, in fact, not exclusively, but they are there. And there's not a lot of desert life depicted, and there is a lot of life of animals that do not dwell in the desert.
So I guess I'd point out to Stokes as we went over it, look at the age. These stones were placed here long before the deserts rolled over and swallowed this land. We will learn much here.
You can see Ed shake his head and say that's just Bernie getting into the for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps this was built on an oasis that dried, on a desert highway that once existed. Perhaps the land was more fertile. Certainly this could not be the seaport that his legend claims it was.
We shall find out more once we enter.
Indeed. Was there anything in specific you were trying to find out about the city or the architecture with that test?
No, you were just saying that they were Persian-esque, and where we are would have been swallowed by the Persian Empire at some point. I don't have any specific knowledge about it, but these are obviously not from that.
No, they're obviously not Persian. The Persian style was not as good at joining block to block, and they almost highlighted that, the bands of stone around it with the arabesques and the sculptures. Still quite beautiful, but a very different style. Although the closest you can probably still think of, Greek columns were very straight and more geometrical, whereas these are certainly carven like the Persians, but the things that are carved on them very much unlike the Persian style.
Well, after I've finished digging through that, if I could call over to...
You'll never be finished. You'll be here for 100 years and not exhaust the archaeological possibility.
If I could call over to my colleagues in the tent, I want to know if they found any writing, a record of what the society found, and perhaps give us a head start in deciphering what's going on here.
All right. Well, we will come back to Percy. So you're looking through the personal possessions.
Yep, and so as I hear William call out, I'm dumping another foot locker and kicking through it, and I just shout back something along the lines of, "I don't know, ask him," and I indicate, I think it's Scott is in the tent with me.
Scott and Alan has now joined you as well in the tent, yes. But you find, a virtual treasure trove, whatever opposed group, this Thule society, they're also made up of archaeologists, occultists, historians, and that kind of person tends to be fairly wealthy. And you're finding a lot of gold coins, keepsakes, tobacco, silver pipes, man's rings that they must wear at times, styling silver necklaces, some bank rolls, money clips, a few bottles of wine stashed away, fine whiskey, cigars, just all kinds of things that a gentleman adventurer would bring with him into the desert. So it looks like they've wherever they are, they've left all their luxuries behind. And in some cases, it looks like they were dropped where they stood. Some of the lockers are not even locked. You find like a pipe stuffed with tobacco that was never lit. So there's certainly a treasure trove for an opportunistic man such as yourself.
So he's grabbing everything of obvious value and like stuffing it into his pack before he throws it back over his shoulder, carrying one of the bottles of wine and the unlit pipe, which he lights up immediately and starts puffing on. And he goes, "Boy, they sure left in a hurry, didn't they?"
Now, Alan is just really busy poring over. There's kind of like a stack of documents, several books and journals on that main table, along with that what looks like a radio unit to you. And he's just pouring through it all. He's very absorbed in like cataloging all of this. And you certainly know that Alan speaks German. Did you say, William, that you spoke German? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And the rest of the party would know of this, yes? Certainly, I'd imagine Alan would.
Oh, they wouldn't be surprised to find out.
All right.
So, finishing ransacking the place for any of the valuables, Percy steps up to Alan, kind of noticing what he's doing, and he's like looking over his shoulder, realizes he doesn't speak a lick of whatever anything is written in, and he starts fiddling with the radio, seeing if it works at all.
All right. Well, so Alan is like right there, and he's like, I'm trying to work here. We need to ascertain where they went to. How did they beat us here? What did they find? And then he like looks at you again, and he sees like you got like 3 watches on and like 4 necklaces. You got rings on all your fingers now, and like your pockets have like bulges in them, and he's just like looks at you like, you're right. They did leave in a hurry, didn't they?
Well, at least they left the good stuff behind, and he takes a swig off of this open wine bottle he's carrying around now, before returning to the pipe.
It looks like they left everything here. I've got journals. I've got a key to their codex, so we can decipher whatever's written in here. I've got radio transcripts. I've got everything. This is the kind of thing that if they had an intelligence officer, all should have been burned before they ever let it fall into anyone's hands.
You can't let a bloke steal without making it unnerving, can you? And so he goes back and continues to like poke with the end of the pipe, different controls on the radio, occasionally like twisting a knob just to see if anything's happening there, because he can't read the journals. So
yeah, actually looking at the radio, you hadn't seen from further away, but now that you're coming up on it, the radio actually looks like it's been smashed, and it looks like something came down on it with tremendous impact, as if someone took a sledgehammer and just brought it down right into the middle of the radio set. And you don't see in evidence like anything that could have come down to smash it like that. There's no big rock or boulder or sledgehammer, or certainly a person couldn't do that without some kind of tool.
So he kind of picks through the wiring and the transistors, and then realizing he's not going to get very far, he just shoves the whole thing off the table into the sand and sits in its place, and he goes, "All right, Alan, tell me what you found."
Like I said, it's everything here.
Well, you said you wanted to find out how they beat us here. How did they get here so much faster than we did?
Well, give me a moment to examine it, to read it. Perhaps we should call in William and Ed. I mean, there's so much material here. If we can each pick.
Ed, Billy boy.
He scowls at you as you just start talking over him. He's like, And Scott, perhaps you should go back and get Bernie and the camels and bring them in. It'll be certainly more comfortable to bed down here rather than in our tents that we brought.
Yes, don't leave the airhead behind.
So Scott runs out to get Benny and the camels. Benny or Bernie? Did I say Benny?
You've been saying Bernie.
Okay, it's Bernie then. I think it's supposed to be Benny, but it's Bernie now. So,
only to his friends.
Only to his friends, yes. So yeah, Bernie and Scott are heading off to bring the camels back. Alan has requested your presence, William, as well as Ed, to help him read through some of this as quickly as possible.
And I'd dive into it because I want to know. I want to know too.
Yeah, and some of it very likely is archaeological notes taken by the German archaeologists that were sent along with their expedition. So certainly some interesting reading to be had there. But I think is that a good place that we can take a 5-minute break, guys, and hit the washroom and stretch our legs and come back? Does that sound okay?
Yep.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Suitably suspenseful. I'll see you guys in 5.
All right.
All right, we're back.
All set.
Okay. My wonderful German name generator here has not failed me. Ratzinger. What a great name. So yes, there are several different documents there. Some of them do look to be more like intelligence reports. Some of them do look to be more of the archaeological transcript variety. Some of them simple journals. Need I ask, what would William gravitate towards?
Oh, he'd want to know what they found for sure.
So would he be looking at like one of the personal journals, or trying to find something that looks more like a architectural log?
Certainly, I'd be going over the journals, and if I could find a name that I recognised, maybe from one of the universities, maybe someone published. I assume they're just not no ones they sent on this. If I could find someone I recognise, I'd read their log, their journal. Otherwise, I'd just be rifling through and looking for architecture. Yeah.
All right. So the name that you would probably recognize would be Erwin Bischoff, which is a well-renowned German archaeologist. And he's often worked with Americans, with British leaders in their fields, scientists, archaeologists, historians. Of course, tensions between the nations are beginning to mount once again. You've had this period of relative peace between the after the Great War, the war to end all wars, and surely there will never be a sequel to that. But there is tension beginning to mount again. So Erwin has less and less been working with outside agencies. So taking up what is transcribed as his journal, flipping through probably to the point where he's coming in, where you start to see some sketches of the architecture, of the pillars, of the arched roof protruding from the sand. You can tell that he's most excited. He's writing that it was exactly where von Juntz supposed it might be in his Unexplicable Kulten, in the Black Book, which he published before his suicide, which was a most suspicious circumstance indeed. And it lines up as well with sources in the Necronomicon. Long has Erwin supposed that some of these other sources, the Necronomicon and the Black Book being his primary ones, although he makes vague reference to the Pancodic manuscripts as well, saying that much like the Bible, whose history is being revealed as true fact and not mere myth and legend, Erwin believes that some of these other books, these ancient tomes, may contain real history at their heart as well. The location of this city, of Iram, of the pillars, could prove that. He could be this leading visionary in saying some of these old myths were true in a way. He, of course, dismisses the idea that this was a seaport, that the ocean has receded from here. That would indeed make it older than humanity. So he dismisses that idea. He says there could be a grain of truth. And in examining the carvings and some of the carvings inside of that arch structure, he believes it was a temple dedicated to the Serpent God Yeag. And this lines up with the sources in the Black Book and with a few vague mentions in the Necronomicon as well. So he believes whoever lived here may have been the original authors of the Pancodic manuscripts, they may have founded a cult that has survived until the ancient past, when it stood alongside Zoroastrianism and the ancient Greek religion and the Egyptians as well. That this could be a whole mythology that we have lost, and here could be the proof to it. That these legends repeated in those tomes were true in their day, that this was a religion that flourished thousands of years ago. So he's very excited about that, and he's drawing a lot of conjecture as well as far as the serpent motif, some of the bas-reliefs inside of that temple, some of the shrines that he has found deeper into that temple. And there is also a map, albeit clearly an incomplete map, of that temple complex. It looks like they had arrived on the scene and been studying the temple and the city for several days, doing some light excavation work. He'd been, of course, working on his journal as well. And at a certain point, it kind of breaks off. It says, we're delving downward ever deeper. We've found a lintel, a doorway in the deepest levels of the temple thus far, that we have found a vast door made of solid gold, that beyond this door we have found a cave complex going down into the substrata, going down into the bedrock of the earth itself. And he details how, according to some of the bas-reliefs that he's examined, this may be a very deep cave structure indeed. And they've prepared a special expedition to go down and find what could be at the heart of that matter. According to the ancient legends, the Pancodic manuscripts, the Necronomicon, that here at the center of the earth would lay their god, Yeag, locked in eternal combat against Sathagua, the evil night god, the stalker and the haunter of the dark, who is the devourer of children. But of course, that's all legendary. What Irwin will find is the truth in this expedition. And it kind of breaks off there. There's a gap, but then there is another entry. It seems to be quickly scrawled and briefly. And it goes on to say, and it is dated, and it looks like it's actually dated for about a month later, about 3 weeks later. And it says, "We have found the truth behind the legend, a horror only we must know. We are preparing the equipment to go back. The entrance must be sealed. For if they find their way to the surface, it will be the end of the German people and perhaps all other people. Tomorrow we will set out, but for now my exhausted limbs must stretch out and rest." And that is the last entry that's left in the diary of Erwin Bischoff.
How long ago is that dated from now?
That's dated for probably about a month ago as well. So at the time that you guys were sitting in Yemen. Now I've lost the name of the city, but the time you guys were sitting, thank you, Aden.
Mm-hmm.
That you were sitting in Aden, perhaps drinking some strong Turkish-style coffee. They had come up from their spelunking expedition, essentially, that somehow they've been underground for a month, at least according to the way the dates line up, but there's no further entry beyond that. It sounds like they escaped escaped from something. They had to go back to seal the way.
I'm trying to figure it.
Were you sort of pointing out the more interesting bits here as you read along? Because I don't know. Otherwise, Percy's just sitting there doing nothing. he's kind of awkwardly looking over people's shoulders,
probably
waiting for
like
them to tell him anything.
Smoking your pipe, you're probably like sipping the fine wine.
He's basically being as annoying as possible, looking over everybody's shoulder while they read.
Yeah, and I am pointing out what I find, but in German to Alan.
Well, Alan's reading the separate manuscript left by Ernst Ratzinger, who's actually the leader of the German expedition. And, you know, you're probably like, you know, interested, clinical. And then that last entry, you know, it must fill you with some apprehension. And looking up, you can see Alan has this worried, confused look on his face as well as he's reading the manuscript before him. So what is your reaction? What do you tell everyone about that manuscript?
I would paraphrase what they found, that they went down into the depths, and it's quite a large, cavernous labyrinth, whatever, area. Also, that they beat us here by 2 months. They beat us here by a lot. So they've gotten here through some means that isn't overland. I mean,
that's
maybe
probably
they just left earlier.
Possibly.
Alan will actually, if you bring that up, he'll say, you know, it was faulty intelligence. According to Ernest's diary, they set out much earlier than we thought. That they found most fortuitous conditions. Their team was assembled quickly, and everything fell well into place for them. So that's Alan can sustain that as just an intelligence failure on the part of MI6.
See, like I said, nothing to worry about. So, are we going to bust into this place or not?
But Alan is most confused as well. I mean, that's not his main concern. Like he'll look up and say, according to Ernest's diary, and he looks at the smashed radio. They were held captive by some force in the underground, and he looks at the tent flap, and you can see it swaying in the breeze. And you could just see the top of that temple beyond outside. He says they've escaped. They've decided they have to go back. They're getting together a force, that they've brought dynamite. They're going to seal a cave. He mentions a cave, and he says he's radioed back. And he looks again at the smashed radio, and that's the last entry.
It appears they did not do so well in the sun.
Sounds like it just drove him mad.
Well, what do you mean drove them mad? Where are they then? It says here they were going back down into, and he looks over at the roof of the temple.
Well, maybe they just got lost down below, or came back out and got lost in the desert. You know, too much sun doesn't do a mind great.
All of them? And he looks, and you see the row of beds. It looks like they probably had 8 people in their expedition.
Maybe the locals got mad. Hauled them all off.
What locals? he's like incredulous. Like there's no one for hundreds of miles.
Look, I don't know anything about this godforsaken place. Is there anything interesting down below that we could, let's say, requisition for Her Majesty and get the hell out of here?
Ernest does not appear to have been a superstitious man. He was seeking military assets for the German government. He believed that there could be a military asset in that temple.
What's he think they've got down there? Some sort of field artillery or something?
Looks like he didn't know, but when he returned from that cave, from the depths of the earth, he thought there was a threat to Germany itself. Such a threat that he reported it as such over the radio and intended to go back down to forever seal it off from the surface.
All I'm saying is he clearly wasn't thinking straight. He smashes his radio, leaving no help for getting any sort of help out here.
There's no
I don't
mention
know.
of
Sounds
him.
crazy to me.
There's no mention of smashing the radio.
Agree to disagree.
Everything seems like their intent was to return. Perhaps it was not, though. It's just not enough to work with here. It's hastily scrawled. There's no mention of them leaving this encampment.
Well, they obviously have. They didn't. They're either in the temple, but they have not come out, or they've wandered off into the desert. I don't see any bodies, and I don't see any animals.
Surely they would have marked down in their journals if they were leaving. Again, if they were going back down. He says they're going to go back down, but he never leaves a final entry indicating that this is the day. You see in his first entry, he marks off, we descend today into what perhaps the ancients would call Yeag. And there's no second entry to support that they went back. Just to mention that he wants to.
Maybe they entered and there was a cave-in and they were trapped and unable to return. Potentially they're dead down there. But if there is a weapon here, we cannot allow the Germans to have it. Not with them arming.
That's true. He looks again at the smashed radio. The only thing I can think of, though, perhaps they never got a chance to leave. Perhaps whatever they escaped from followed them back here, and he looks again, just that radio with the it's been just crushed. You know, something like a sledgehammer-like force came down on it.
So am I to understand that you believe something was living in this temple for thousands of years, waiting for some krauts to come up and break a radio?
Right. We can really solve this pretty quickly. And Percy scoops up the radio from where he knocked it down in the sand, and he hauls it off out of the tent and starts making his way towards the camels.
All right. Alan actually might say, "Wait, we should examine it," and he rushes out after you.
Percy's ranting about it. It's broken. I already looked at it. That's why I knocked it off the table in the first place. It was just occupying valuable seat space. And he continues to carry it off towards the camels, and he tries to get it under one of the camel's hooves to prove that maybe an animal or something stomped on it.
Okay. It's certainly a camel could not have done that. Like I said, it really looks like someone just took a sledgehammer and just smashed it as hard as they possibly could in a single blow. And it's probably either a really big hammer or a really strong dude or both. That's the kind of impact that it looks like. And certainly nothing a camel could generate. But Alan does come up, and he's just trying to look at the radio, and now it's out in the light, so he kind of kneels down in the sand, and he's kind of picking through the pieces, and he kind of comes up and he holds something up, and he extends his hand. You can see he's got just a tiny flake of stone in his hand.
Okay,
And
what's so interesting here? Could have been on the ground from when I threw it on the ground earlier, or from when I threw it on the ground this time.
He looks very confused at the flake of basically limestone, and says he like looks around at the sand everywhere, and he's like, I don't see any other stone flakes. It looked to me like it was inside of the radio. Perhaps
So
it was a
assuming
folder.
What are you saying? A meteor fell out of the sky and landed on the radio without puncturing their tent? Wait, did it puncture their tent? And he starts to make his way back to the tent.
He just leaves the radio in the sand at that point and comes back inside. What's William's reaction to Alan and his apprehension about, he seems to be getting a little bit worried.
I'm sure, be worried, but I'm not sure what he's frightful of. They're not here. We've been here for probably a while. It probably took us a couple of hours to read through these journals and dig around. We're unmolested.
Yeah, and Scott has probably been cleaning up the inside of the tent with the intent that you guys are going to stay in there. Ed might also be looking through some of the manuscripts. Bernie as well. So poor Scott is like doing all the grunt work here, but their manuscripts basically support exactly what you guys have found as well.
What time of day are we reaching here?
I think you would have come up on the. Let's say that dusk is approaching very rapidly. So the sun is coming down. It's starting to get cool in the desert. You probably approached the camp either just before or just after noon.
Well, you and the rest of the brains were out there, Billy Boy. Did you find the entrance or not?
Wasn't the entrance just a humongous arc? Could we just see that, or?
Yeah, the main entrance certainly would be visible to anyone. And yes, you do have this map of the inside, and it looks as if there's a page torn out, as if he might have had a more detailed map drawn up at some point, but someone has torn that page out.
I would turn to Alan and I would go, see here, he's taken his more detailed maps when they've gone back in. I feel that all that has happened here is a spelunking expedition gone tragically awry.
Alan just still seems very worried. It's just so unlike Commander Ernst to break with protocol and not leave a log of going back down.
Well, I see it as great news for us. Tent's empty, place to sleep, didn't even have to set up any of our stuff, and didn't have to kill anybody to steal all this, so why don't we just bed down for the night and make our way in tomorrow? They must be downstairs. I'm with Billy Boy.
Yes, we should at least sleep on it. In the morning we'll decide what to do. I'm not convinced that I want to go down there, but let's all sleep on it.
Percy goes over to one of the cots that Scott is brushing off, and as soon as he finishes getting the sand off that one, he just flops down into it, ignoring the fact that there's still cleaning to do.
All right. So Alan will certainly give Scott the first watch. They are maintaining some kind of military discipline there. So do you guys want to make notice tests as you're bedding down, or is there anything else that you do before bedding down?
I think Percy polishes off the bottle of fine wine that he found before tapping the last bit of his pipe out to clean it for morning, and then kind of sets it beside him and passes out with the bottle of wine hitting the sand beneath him.
I'd probably pull out an electric lantern and keep poring over these notes, filling in my own journal, etc., doing my bookwork at the end of the day.
All right. So as you guys are, drifting off to sleep, I will get those notice tests.
I got nothing, and I'd even take a penalty for it for getting blackout drunk right before.
What about you, William?
No, I've failed as well.
All right. So as you drift off to sleep, you're occupied by strange dreams. Certainly, this place, your journey, has fired your imagination. Dreams of writhing serpents made of stone, swirling into sand in a sandstorm, sucking you down into that cavernous opening, that temple, which may be dedicated to Yeag, the Serpent God. So very strange and dour dreams. But as you awaken, you can hear some, actually a name being called out. Ed? 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 Ed's missing. Wake up. Wake up, everyone. Ed's gone.
What now?
You can see Alan kind of rushing around, looking. He runs as soon as he sees you guys are waking up. He kind of runs out of the tent. You can hear him shouting, "Ed! Ed!"
He probably just wandered off to look at rocks or something. And Percy at first kind of slumps back down, and then as he continues to shout, he gets up and staggers out of the tent behind him. He takes his pack with him.
All right, the landscape is unchanged. You can see your camels sitting, chewing their cud. Scott quickly rushes out. He's woken up and taken up his rifle immediately, and he's rushed out, and he joins in calling, "Ed! Ed!" and looking around. So I'd imagine Percy probably just starts getting breakfast ready for himself. What's William's reaction? Ed appears to be missing. They're shouting quite loud. There's not a lot of cover he could be hiding behind in the immediate area, and the sound carries quite far over the desert dunes.
I guess I'd say there is only one place that he could have gone. He hasn't wandered off into the desert. He is an archaeologist at heart. I'm sure we'll find him examining this structure.
Who was on watch, Al?
Alan looks over and said, I had last left Ed on watch.
Well, where'd you leave him? Let's go look and see where his footprints lead. Really, am I the brains of this operation now?
All right, make a tracking test to try to find any footprints that Ed may have left.
Oh boy, this will be good. Percy's highly skilled tracking roll. That's at -2, so I got nothing.
All right.
We have bennies though, right? Can I use a benny to reroll?
Yeah.
I don't
so
remember.
You each get 3 bennies. You can use that for a reroll or to soak damage if you get hit or hurt.
All right. I took luck, so I get an extra benny. So I'm going to burn
you have
one.
4 bennies.
I'm going to burn one and try this one more time.
Sure.
Nope, even worse. So he tries to look around as hard as he can, and he goes, I can't make heads or tails of this.
Yeah, the wind is very constant in this region, and it quickly swallows up footprints. at least to the degree that you're able to discern them. So Alan, you can see he's really shooken up by this. Bernie has he's pretty much just joined you at breakfast. He doesn't seem overly concerned about this. And, over breakfast, Percy, as he's getting the, he's sipping his coffee, he's getting the fire set up, and he looks at you and says, "This is why it is important to have occult protection." And he kind of rubs. You can see under his shirt. You think he's wearing some kind of amulet or necklace. It's under his shirt, so you're not able to see exactly what it could be, but he certainly carries himself with an air that he is protected.
And Percy doesn't really respond. He doesn't believe in that mumbo jumbo, so he's just kind of grunts at him and upends one of the whiskey bottles that he looted from the previous day into the coffee that is brewing.
All right. So Alan and Scott will return. They've basically run the perimeter. They can't find Ed. He seems to have vanished either into the desert or, as you said, William, into the depths of the temple. They don't know which. But they start taking their breakfast as well. But Alan seems very shaken up. Scott is a very literal-minded man, so he's not as shooken up by this, but he's certainly on guard. Alan says to you, "I don't know if this should increase our argument that we need to go down there, or perhaps this is evidence we need to leave. What do you think?"
We will surely find our compatriot as soon as we enter the cabin network. Men don't simply evaporate in the night. And his camel didn't disappear, did it?
No, all the camels are still there.
And he's not left. His beast is still here. We shall find him.
Billy Boy's right now.
I'm sure.
He was always all about getting to see the whatever rocks you guys were looking at first. Probably he just wanted to get down there ahead of us.
The question has still remained in my mind, even before Ed's disappearance. Should we go down there?
If not, then why have we come? Why have we journeyed across this accursed inferno of a landscape?
We came to assess and then to deal with the situation with our own discretion. But we were not anticipating that the Germans would beat us here. We're ill-equipped to deal with an equally sized party. If they're still down there, we meet them.
Then you would return and say you were scared off by an empty tent, abandoning Mr. Stokes.
You can see he looks very genuinely conflicted, and he really is looking for advice. Scott nods his head and says, "There's Nazis down there. We get to shoot us some Nazis. I'm pretty happy to go down there."
Percy drains his coffee and goes, right, and if there is some kind of field gun thereafter, whether it be made of stone or logs, I don't really care, but it would be one of the biggest things I ever got to steal. And I imagine it would make Her Majesty quite happy, maybe happy enough to leave me be.
And Bernie kind of nods his head and wistfully says, "If I am to engage in this democracy, if it is democracy that we speak of, then my vote would be down into the earth, to visit Yoth, as he puts it, a place which casts a long shadow in myth and history.
Sure, let's go with Creepy's vacation, too.
I'd turn to Alan and I'd point out that they've been down there for days. They have not returned. I don't think you'll find anything alive in there. Aside from, hopefully, our Mr. Stokes. Or Dr. Stokes, but I'm not sure. Probably Dr. Stokes.
He should be a doctor. So with the kind of collective mind made up, Alan, the only one really reticent about it, he nods his head and certainly consents. Then into the temple we'll go. You should eat heartily and prepare many supplies. According to Ernst's diary, it's a long way down.
Buck up, Al. Aren't you, Her Majesty's spy? Shouldn't you be a bit more, bold, for lack of a better term? It'll all be fine.
Spies who walk into basements often don't come back out. This is the biggest basement I've ever heard of.
Well, I'll just do my best to make sure nobody nails you down and pops you in the back of the head, then.
He just kind of shakes his head as if that's exactly what he's afraid of, and he doesn't like you joking about it. He doesn't say anything. So following breakfast, you do prepare your supplies, food, water, bedrolls, everything that you would need for this spelunking expedition, potentially rope. The Nazis have left a lot of supplies behind, although according to their inventory, they had a fairly large supply of dynamite, and you're not able to find that. But most of the other goods that they brought are still here, including all of those personal possessions, which are now the personal possessions of Percy.
You mean my personal possessions?
Yes. Yes. And then I take it you head down into that great temple, which has lain dormant here in the desert for perhaps thousands of years. Is that correct?
Yep.
All right, so exiting the tent, those heavy packs on your back, coming through this forest of pillars, these standing, coiled stone serpents of which you have dreamt in the night. You see the great arch standing there, surmounted by a anthropomorphized snake, this serpent man representing Yeag, or at least theoretically, that's the conjecture that has been put to you in these diaries, or rather in the diary of Erwin Bischoff. And the now 5 of you stride forward, coming under that black arch into the shadow of this temple, wading through the sand that is choking this aperture. And of course, you all have flashlights, either that you brought or that you have filched from the Nazi equipment. So the beams of your lights shining out onto the sandstone. You see the inside of the walls carved with bas-reliefs, sculptures, murals depicting snakes, serpents, sometimes broken up by other scenes, birds, fish, animal life. Again, it's this very biological cornucopia, this menagerie. So there's not that geographical representation, geometric representation that you would see in like a Greek structure, nor is there writing, as you might find in an Egyptian structure. Hieroglyphics seem to be largely absent. But stalking through, no doubt, our good historian would be taking copious notes as he's able. Actually, have you brought a camera with you, or are you just drawing and sketching?
I hadn't thought about it. I'm not sure what camera technology was like in the 30s.
Probably pretty heavy for a
Um,
small desert
yeah, I'd
exposition.
probably be sketching as well.
Okay.
Uh, Also, I would have brought that map out of that diary for sure. Probably the whole diary would have pocketed.
Absolutely. All right, and indeed, following the map, you pass through. It's very largely intact, and once you get, a few dozen meters inside, there's less of the evidence of sand choking the hallways, piled up on the doors, being blown in against the walls, and it starts to look like just empty rooms, empty corridors, a space that could have been occupied yesterday in many ways, that only the desert wind, the heat, has penetrated, but not the light. You can see sconces in places where torches may have been held. And heading forward, you begin to descend. That arch, as it was said, was at the very top of the temple. And as you're heading down, through these spiraling staircases, and in fact, staircase is not a apt word. It's more of a spiraling ramp that leads you down. It's not a step, but it's a gradual slope. And there's a great deal of this sloped, slithering, undulating architecture as you are going down into the darkness with the beams of your flashlights, your only illumination. So going down, you start to pass some of these shrines, some of these altars of this anthropomorphized serpent, this man snake, which Irwin believes represented Yeag. And you start to pass through larger statues, also devoted to this god, this serpent-headed man, sometimes depicted with multiple serpent heads, sometimes with the legs joining together into a serpent's tail, sometimes with snakes for hands on these statues, sometimes just a man covered in writhing serpents, as if they had been dropped into a snake pit. And it is indeed a long journey down. There are many of these halls. There are many of these large rooms that may have been rooms of worship. Some of them have windows through which the sand has poured, filling the room or half the room, sloping up, into the top of that windowed arc. And you can only think to yourself the weight of sand pressing down on the structure. But you continue to descend down and down and down into the inky blackness. And eventually the air begins to change. It begins to become cool. Whereas outside, the sweltering heat had been oppressive, probably for weeks, ever since you've arrived in this land. And eventually you come to that doorway that was mentioned, this enormous golden door carved of gold.
How come none of you mentioned the gold door to me?
Like a wall of serpents, a wall of undulating coils. It stands and appears to be on a pivot in its center, such that it opens sideways, and it is gaping open as you're approaching.
You know full well why we have not mentioned this door.
How big is the door?
It's very large. It's probably like 12 feet tall and like about 12 feet wide. It's pretty much a square door, and it's occupying basically the whole of this hallway. As you're coming up, shining the beams of your flashlight, you see beyond that, it's not the smooth bas reliefs, the serpentine undulating floorway. It's a rough, partially hewn cave floor. It's craggy rock walls and a ceiling, also partially hewn, but showing some evidence of stalactites. And just past that doorway, you can see two enormous statues inside this natural cave, one on either side of this doorway, glaring across at each other. One of them seems to be warding. It's holding its hand up in protection. This is the Serpent God Yeag, to whom you've seen so many shrines and altars above. And across from it, you can see a bloated, squatting figure, somewhat reminding you of a frog or toad covered in warts and fur, cloaked in bat wings, and with an enormous mouth with tiny beady eyes. And it seems to be slathering, as if it's about to lunge forward. These two statues guard the entrance to this cave system, as if Yeag is eternally warding this other figure off to keep it away from his temple. You can see Alan has grown increasingly tremulous. He has never called out, trying to echo Ed's name to locate him. Scott is maintaining his composure much better, and Bernie seems to be wandering in a hazy dream, as he is most of the time. So what's your reaction as you're moving through this massive temple complex? You've gone down perhaps 10 levels, and you don't know exactly where the bedrock began, but you know you're quite deep.
Percy has pushed his hood back from his face and wiped the sweat from his brow as the air got cooler, and sort of taken note of Alan still being a bit fearful of all of this, and it kind of makes a remark, something like, "Don't worry, Al, it's just stories. You know, we made up all sorts of monsters all over the world. Can't be anything too terrifying down here. Maybe some bats, but are there bats here?" And he starts to look around at the ceiling with his flashlight.
You've seen nothing living so far, but you're right. You feel the air. It is actually a breeze. Seems to be blowing up through that cavern. And as you notice it, you realize that it's a damp breeze. Moisture is being carried up from the depths.
What do you think, Billy Boy? Anything interesting here?
There is much of interest. It did mention in the diaries that they did find a big open cavern underneath. Was that correct?
Yeah, and he made a note, both Ernest and Erwin, that they found this door, and they described it, so you know it's the same door, and that there's a cave beyond. And he did describe verbally that the cave seems to go quite deep, but there are markers they were following. And once they realized how deep it goes, they prepared a spelunking expedition to follow the markers down into the lightless depths of what he believes is Yoth.
I'm a little surprised we haven't found Ed, but I see no reason why we shouldn't just continue to follow these markers.
There are other tunnels though, right?
Yeah, at this point it becomes like a natural cave, or perhaps an unnatural cave. There are some markers. There are places where the floor has been smoothed out, places where stalagmites have been cleared away. It actually looks very much traveled. So it's this broad, wide pathway leading through into this cave.
Well, my guess is Ed probably just got lost. We could split up, and some of us could follow the markers, and some of us could try to go find Ed, but we might get lost too. Frankly, it's his damn fault for wandering down here by himself.
Yeah, I guess I'd call out, Dr. Stokes!
The echo reverberates down into the cave. There's no reply but your own voice back in that echo.
Well,
Start to fear for our companion's well-being. We must journey on.
Alan looks at you. I start to fear for our own well-being.
We haven't found any bodies. There's no accounting for any of the missing folks we know about down here, so as far as I'm concerned, they're all just lost.
And Bernie kind of turns to you and says, "This is a place infamous for becoming lost in. Few have ever returned from the depths of Yeag.
Few have ever been here, I would say. Just the 8 and us. At least in the history of men. Or recorded history might be a better terminology."
Bernie just nods, and he just starts to walk forward into the cave, into the cavern.
Does he appear to be following the markers?
Yeah, certainly.
Well, he seems to know where he's going, so I'm just going to follow him.
And indeed, heading down into that cave, it continuously slopes downward. There are multiple branching pathways off of it. This must be a massive cave network. But there are those markers, and they take the form of small shrines to Yeag. And at every branching where there's danger of losing your way, you can see somewhere in the distance one of these statues, these small altars to Yeag, leading the way. And these altars, these statues, all have their faces, again, pointed down into the depths, as if they are again looking outward, away from the temple, which is now somewhere above you, or everywhere above you, perhaps.
We can just follow the statues, though, right? We're not going to get lost. We could easily reverse our steps here, or should we be leaving a trail?
You can certainly blaze a trail. It's probably unnecessary. You should be able to find your way back pretty easily.
Okay.
But if you feel the need, you can certainly blaze a trail, leave markers in the rock. If you have, I don't know, you'd have to actually.
I've got a crowbar.
There you go.
But yeah, I think we'll. Yep. I think we'll just follow, or at least Percy will just follow the statues and Bernie, since Bernie seems to be somehow familiar with this cave in Percy's mind.
I'm just gonna grab a drink while Phil's coming back.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna go let my dog out. David's just grabbing a drink, and I'm gonna run my dog out real quick.
All right.
Make it back, Phil?
Yeah, mate, yeah.
Sorry, we just went to hydrate when you dropped out.
Yeah, it's all good.
Right, so you're traversing through these caves, following the statues of Yeag, ever looking for the back of that serpentine head to lead you forward into the darkness. Can you both make notice tests?
Oh.
All right, and there are exploding dice in this system.
Yep, so I got a 6.
When you roll, perfect. So when you roll the maximum number possible on your dice, so a 6 on a d6, you roll another d6 and add the two together.
Yeah. So that's a 7 total.
All right.
Oh, wait. I have a bad eyes feature. Does that give me a negative?
Yeah, I think it should be -2, which is still a success because the success is 4.
Bad eyes. -2 to attack and notice something on 5-foot distance. Beautiful. Yeah, so that takes that down to a 5.
Let's see. So as you're heading downwards, in places as it is descending, and it's almost constantly going downwards for you in this journey. There are some places that do become rather steep, and as you're walking in one of these steep places, your flashlights come over this small square brown object right in the middle of the path there. And you of course, Percy, recognize it immediately. It's a wallet.
Which I, of course, scoop right up.
Yes.
No question.
Now, William, of course, has seen this object as well, and he would no doubt see you pick it up.
Sure. Percy isn't trying to hide it, though. He's just immediately going through it. He sort of casually glances at, whatever identification or what have you would be in the front, but he's really looking for cash, Deutschmarks, anything.
Right.
Well, sort of out of habit.
Actually, taking a look inside, you see that it actually has an American driver's license, and it's made out to Ed Stokes, Dr. Ed Stokes of Arkham, Massachusetts. So it would appear that Ed has been down this way.
Well, it looks like we're hot on the good doctor's trail, so everybody can relax now. He probably just slipped on one of these steep inclines and lost his wallet.
That's exactly what it looks like. But you can see that Alan, and Alan looks perhaps more perturbed at this. He's like, this doesn't make sense. Why would he go forward without us?
Because he's ambitious. He was already arguing with Billy Boy over who gets to lay claim to whatever discoveries they're all excited about. Frankly, I'd be ambitious too, but more in hopes of finding that German dynamite you all were yapping about. See if I can't get that door to maybe come with us in parts.
Even Scott looks a little worried at this point. Bernie almost just keeps walking forward and almost leaves you guys behind. He's just in this trance-like state as he's walking past the serpent idols. He almost caresses each one as he moves by. For anyone else, be very out of character. For him, he's always been an odd duck. What's William's reaction to finding Ed's wallet here?
Just reaffirms that he's come down exploring the caverns. And an educated mind is a curious mind. We shall find him. We continue this path.
All right.
Surely, this trace of him must let your mind at ease, Mr. Simmons.
If anything's amiss here, it might be our friend Bernie Boy's fascination with these snakes of his. Anybody noticed he's been a bit off since we've gotten down here?
Since we've arrived.
Well,
since we met him, pretty much.
Since we left, yeah.
I always liked his oddness, but it's kind of off-putting down here, even for me.
But continuing down through this cave system, it's been hours since you left the light of the sun behind. The air is now cool and damp. There's precipitation dripping down off the stalactites above you. And yet there's still this breeze that's blowing through. And the air is, if anything, growing fresher the deeper you go. In the depths of the temple, it was stale, stagnant, dusty. And here, it's left behind a lot of that, and it's almost becoming earthy as you move down, like the smell after a rain. But as you're marching down, you come upon a larger cavern, and seated next to your pathway is an enormous statue of Yeag, also as large as the one guarding the doorway originally. And this one, again, has that warding gesture towards the end of this cavern. And perhaps you hadn't realized it at first as you're coming through. It's such a slight change. But now that you are in this larger cavern and you look down towards the end, you're starting to be able to make out features of the cave that your flashlight is not playing over. As if there's some luminescence at the far end. As if there's some light shining there.
Everyone, turn off your flashlights.
I do so.
All right, and yes, you now find yourself in not complete blackness, just a shade above, just enough to make out the figures around you. Now, of course, that statue of Yeag is just looming in the darkness. You know, it's about 12 feet tall. So it casts a very grisly outline with the snarling fangs and the scaled countenance, the clawed hands.
Can we make out where this luminescence is coming from?
Certainly from the far end of this larger cave.
Percy wants to be pretty careful and stealthy in how he approaches the light source.
All right.
So he kind of waves everybody behind him and encourages them to sort of follow his lead as he carefully picks his way through the cavern. Not quite on tiptoe, but slowly so as not to trip himself up. He's very decisive about where he places his foot, like checking each step to make sure he's not going to knock something over or run into anything.
Yeah. Make a notice test.
That is a success. 4.
All right. So as you're coming through, you can see that the light is coming from this slit at the end of the cave. It's actually kind of off to one side. But it's actually not a white or a yellow light. It's actually a slightly blue light. And there's just this bar, this slit of light ahead of you with this blue luminescence pouring in. The cave is very, very long, and that's why it's so dim and dark at the other end. And the slit is very narrow, but it seems like there's bright light on the other side of it. Anyone could notice that, but as you're coming through, or anyone who's going closer towards it, but as you're coming through, you start to notice some unusually craggy rocks. And just looking at them, the outline strikes you as artificial. And it seems like there's cracks in the wall connecting them. And then you realize that these are not rock formations, that these are actually bundles of dynamite. And they are not connected by cracks, they're connected by wires. And you can see that the cave around you has been ringed with layers of dynamite. So it's all essentially set to explode this large cavern.
Do I see where the main wire leads to, or if there is a main wire?
Yes, if you want to take just a minute to follow the connections. The line, actually you appear to have passed it, so you kind of have to turn around. But coming back through, you do see just sitting there innocuously, innocently, something you hadn't noticed before. You thought it was a rock. It's off to the side against some large rocks, but there's the small box with the lever. It doesn't actually. I don't know if you have any knowledge of demolitions. You probably don't.
Nope.
But you see, the box with the lever. It appears to be the detonator here, and it is quite some distance down the line before those rings of explosives begin.
So what Percy would do is he kind of grabs some of his clothing and tucks his flashlight under it and turns the light back on, so it's just enough dim light to see a little better. And he kind of motions for Scott to come over and says, "Have you ever seen anything like this? Do you think we could safely remove it?"
So Scott, running forward, he's brought his rifle with him. He pretty much brings it everywhere with him. So he hustles forward, his big pack on his back, and he kneels down and he looks at it. It's like he looks up at you with confusion. It looks like it's all prepped and ready to go, but it's not armed. All you need to do is arm it, which is this switch here, and then pick up the plunger. When you drop it down, boom.
So I motion for him to follow me quietly, and we work our way back to the rings of dynamite proper, and I'm trying to figure out how it's actually adhered to the wall.
It looks like they drove in some iron stakes and just hung it up on that and wired it together. Nothing very complicated.
Okay, so Percy goes, "Well, this is just perfect. So on our way back, you, Scott, are going to help me carry a couple of these back up to the door, and we're going to see if we can't blast some of it out and take some gold home with us."
Scott just looks at you like he's got bigger fish to fry than that. Like, this is not our mission.
Great, so we're agreed. Onward!
Okay. So coming through, as you're coming closer to that blue litten slit, you start to be able to see more details, and you're squinting. You've been with these shitty dim 1936 flashlights, and now it's gradually getting lighter. But as you're getting closer, it's like you're blinking, you're trying to focus your eyes, and it looks like it's an identical door, a golden door. And it's just open a crack. It's just been twisted just enough for light to come in through one side.
So I'm going to very, very cautiously first draw my revolver, and sort of indicate to everybody else that if they have a weapon, it might be wise to pull it. And Percy's going to put his hand on the door and make like he's about to open it, and then he's going to step back and push Scott in front of him and sort of indicate that he should open the door.
All right, so Scott will step forward and he'll kind of like put his shoulder up against it, and he'll start to lean with his body weight, and he leans, and an enormous door, and it's almost a foot thick, and it's just on this pivot, this huge square, which is probably gold plated, but it could be solid gold for all you know. 12 feet tall, 12 feet wide, pivot right in the center. He's just trying to spin it, but it's so big, all of his body weight, he's braced his legs, and that crack just starts to widen just ever so slowly, and then it gives way suddenly, and there's this cascade of light, this blue light fills up the cave mouth, and you're probably all dazzled by it for a moment, as again, you've been used to this subterranean darkness, and blinking, and you're looking, as your eyes seem to recover, you're looking out on this blue mist, this hazy mist in the distance. You don't see any floor. You just see a curtain ceiling of blue glowing mist. And you can hear Bernie gasp. It is just as the legends say. And he starts to like stagger forward towards this, and he's got like his hand up under his shirt, grasping whatever amulet that is that he's wearing. What's your reaction? You guys rush forward at this point?
Yeah, I assume the whole party would roll into the room, start each doing our individual thing.
All right. And as you step up to that doorway, close enough to start to look down, because it is down. It's as if it opens into a pit, into a vast empty space. And as you step in, you realize it's a massive space, and coming out, it's as if you're emerging from a cave on the side of a mountain. The ground slopes downward into a valley floor below you, and the floor of this valley is covered with grass, with vegetation. Looking off to the side, you can see the wall stretching away infinitely on either side, as if it's the side of some infinite mountain that you walked out of. Looking back up above you, you see the top of this slope receding into this blue glowing mist that makes up the sky of this entire valley.
Percy's going to kind of take a cursory look around, and he sort of elbows William and goes, "Billy boy, give me your binoculars."
I'd hand him over.
And he starts scanning to see if there's any water visible in the area.
All right. And you can see that Scott and Alan are just completely gobsmacked. This, what must be a cave, and yet it's so vastly huge that it's closer to being outside than inside, as far as it's with the blue glowing sky illuminating everything with this alien radiance. They're just totally gobsmacked by this. Indeed, make notice tests, and you with the binoculars get that +2. You with the bad eyes get -2.
Just while we do this, that golden door, well, that's a fail for me. That golden door wasn't open wide enough to let a man through, was it?
No, it was not.
So we know that Dr. Stokes didn't come through here. Or you can assume he probably wouldn't have heaved that door closed.
It does seem unusual, yes.
So he's turned around. Oh.
Excellent. So Percy, you would certainly notice as you're looking out, you see, this, it reminds you of a mountainside sloping down beneath you. And it eventually comes down into greenery, grass, bushes, growing things, vines, and you can see in that some disturbance that looks like footprints coming down, like booted footprints, the exact kind of shoes, in fact, that Ed Stokes was wearing when you last saw him, as if perhaps he passed down this way into this mist-shrouded valley. In answer to your question regarding water, the valley is indeed very mist-shrouded. You believe you can see a forest, trees growing to your left down on that valley floor, and you think you see a ribbon of water ahead of you across the floor of the valley. Off to the right, the valley just seems to open up, although there must be a far end to the cave somewhere, but you can't see it. It's just this massive opening.
Can I tell how many people moved through the footprints?
As far as you can tell, there's just the one set of footprints.
Okay. Good news and bad news, boys. I think that there's definitely some water down here, so I'm going to go ahead and say our German friends may still be sniffing about if they're lost down here. The good news is I think the good doctor has been through here. There's a trail down the mountainside here.
All right, they're just like Alan and Scott are just like in shock still. They just can't believe what they're seeing. They look at you like the Germans. Yeah, the Germans. This is amazing.
Yes. Let's get to finding the field gun or whatever it is and haul it out of here before they find it.
They've had many days. Sorry. The Germans have had many days ahead of us to search. If there is a weapon down here, it is not immediately here. I doubt we'll find anything of that nature.
When I scanned around, was there anything else interesting, structures of some kind or anything?
Not that you can see, no, at this moment. So do you guys head off? I assume you go down the slope, but do you head into the open end of the valley, or what appears to be the forested end, or do you first go hit up that river on the far side?
I'm gonna say probably where does the trail go?
It goes down and it seems to veer off to the right towards the open area. But you'll have to try to keep up with the trail.
I vote we try to keep up with our man here and see if we can't track him down. Unless anybody else has a better idea.
I think that would be for the best. Where you going with your banana?
Make additional notice tests as you're moving.
Oh boy, no, so good. Well, I have the binoculars still. I guess I didn't hand them back to Billy Boy.
Yeah.
So
if you're using them to scan.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, actually, being that we're trying to follow a trail, I probably wouldn't be using them. So I'm gonna burn a one more Benny
Okay.
and give that another go. Crit fail.
All right. What about you, William?
No, I got a 1. I might use a Benny to have a reroll as well, just because, I don't know, for reasons which aren't abundantly clear to me right now.
Sure.
Percy's got dirt in his eyes in the meantime. A breeze or something picked up.
So DM, what happens there? I've got a 4 on the D4 and a 6 on the D6.
I would re-roll both and just take whichever one gets a higher total overall. That's
Okay.
The book doesn't have a specific ruling on that scenario in my
Just go with the highest.
recollection. So I'd explode both dice and take the highest total.
Oh, that's an 11 minus 2 is a 9.
All right. So that's a raise, but not quite a double raise. So as you guys are descending, you're heading towards this open valley, and it's just opening up, and you can see the other side across from the river, this curving valley floor that seems to go up like another mountain face on the other side before disappearing into the blue light. And presumably there's a ceiling somewhere, but you can't see it through the mist. But the valley just stretches off, and as you're heading down, you're getting this moisture in the mist, and the humidity is now rising. It's actually getting very warm again. But as you guys are descending, and there are rocks, crags, boulders, hanging vines, bushes. There's a tremendous amount of cover, but there is kind of a path going down. You could barely call it a path. It's like maybe some goats have been moving through here. And indeed, you see small lizards, spiders, small animals moving about. But William, you actually notice as you're moving, you think at first, you look and you're looking at this crazy spectacle, and one of the rocks seems to bob down behind another rock, and you think that rock looked like a head. You think there's a person. It's not a rock. It's a person. There's someone is glaring at you from behind this crag for a second. You thought you saw his face, but it was a craggy, rocky face. He must have been wearing a mask or something.
So I don't think it's Dr. Stokes.
It must be someone wearing a mask. It didn't look like a human face, but it was a face. It was either someone like covered in paint or mud or a mask or something. You only saw it for a moment, and it ducked back behind a rock. You think someone is watching you from one of the crags above.
I'd probably tag Alan, who's become our pseudo leader, or just straight up leader, and I would tell him I saw someone up behind those rocks. He had a mask, or he was covered in mud, maybe. I don't think it was our compatriot, but I doubt it was one of the Germans either. I don't know why they'd be down here in masks.
All right, so Alan would kind of like reel. He'll reach in. He'll pull out his pistol, and Scott obviously will overhear this as well. He'll turn. He has his rifle. He starts to move it to train on that crag. What's Percy's reaction?
Percy is going to kind of look in the right direction and then say, well, it's reasonable to assume that they saw us before we saw them. So he kind of ducks behind anything that looks like it might provide some cover.
All right. So as there's this flurry of motion among your party, you see the figure stand up again. It comes up, rears back, and hurls a spear from on high. The spear comes rushing down and impales Alan. Comes straight into his gut, and he lets out a cry, "Oh!" and falls to the ground, holding his gut, crumpling in the fetal position, and he just starts to roll down the hill. The figure immediately turns, begins loping off into the mist up the hill. Scott fires his rifle off as this happens. You can see Bernie is just standing there, muttering under his breath, grasping his amulet through his shirt, as if that will be his protection. But as the figure has stood, and you saw it exposed in the blue light, it doesn't. It looks like it must be a man, but in some strange costume with an articulated mask. As it turns, it goes loping off. And it doesn't appear completely humanoid. But it must be a man in some fanciful costume. It's decorated like green scales, like flashing yellow eyes, a mouth full of fangs, no neck in this incredibly stooped posture, and the costume almost seems to include a long swishing tail behind it. Scott fires his rifle. You see the rock near it explode as it goes loping into the mist. And very quickly it disappears from view of you unless you go chasing after. But what do you do?
Percy would say probably direct one of our intellectuals to look after Alan. So
he's rolling down the side of the fucking valley.
Yeah.
Like, it's a pretty steep slope, and you guys have been like doing switchback style. But he's just rolling down, except for this spear in his gut, it's making him less able to tumble.
Right.
So he's effectively out of reach of us.
You could try to scramble down the face of the valley to go and stop him from rolling all the way down to the floor.
One of you look after him, and Percy draws his revolver and takes off after this thing.
All right.
Oh my gosh, we're going to split a two-man party.
Back of the head.
All right, make a climb test as you're going after it, Percy.
Well, we'll see. I might fall right back to you.
Yeah, climb test as well to see if you're able to get down and reach Alan, William.
Climb will be 4 for sure.
Okay.
I do have rope, but it's not secured to anything, so that's probably not going to be helpful.
No. If you want to risk falling, you can take a +2, I would say. But if you do fail with that +2, you're going to fall.
Well, I already rolled, so I'll stick with my failure. And kind of like, so what Percy does is he scrabbles at the dirt and rocks to try and get up the hillside towards this thing, and then just kind of gets angry and like
down.
Yeah, gets angry when he slides back down, and angrily throws his revolver back into its holster and goes, "Damn it, Alan, you still alive down there?" He hollers down as he comes back to the cliffside there.
What was your result on that, William? You said a pass?
Yeah, I've got a 4. I don't think I've got any negatives on it.
Okay. So yeah, scrambling down, you're able to grab the collar of Alan's shirt and stop him from rolling. You know, you're dragged downhill a few feet before you stabilize, but you never fall off your feet though. But looking down, you can see that Alan is certainly dead. His body is limp. There's a huge amount of blood gushing out of that wound. That he shit himself when he died. His eyes are completely glazed, and there's this look of stark terror on his face, as the last thing he saw was that hideous mask of glaring yellow eyes and fanged maw. And Scott has come down to try to help you, but he's slightly behind you, and he sees that that Alan is dead, and he's just, his eyes go wide. He's, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, what? That wasn't a German. That wasn't a German. Oh my god.
Percy pulls the rope out of his pack and tosses it down to help everybody come back up, and he goes,
They're not
"Quick!"
that far.
Oh, they're not too far down?
Yeah, it's not. It's probably like a 35-degree angle or something close to that.
Okay.
So it's as long as you don't get a spear in your gut, it's pretty easy to maintain your balance. But if you start trying to move at high velocity, you might fall if you're not careful.
Okay.
But it's not super dangerous by itself, just an impediment.
So then I guess Percy would actually work his way down too, and would get a look at the body as well. And he'd probably get the eyes closed and pat Alan on the cheek and go, well, at least it wasn't a pop in the back of the head, mate.
Oh. So as you guys are down there, you've gone downhill slightly. Bernie, who's been just standing there grasping his amulet, suddenly bolts, and he starts rushing after the figure, climbing and scrabbling up over the rock crags at the highest velocity he can manage. So he is splitting from the party. He hasn't said anything as he's done this. So you guys are a ways back from him, though. What's your reaction to that?
I'd probably call out to him, Mr. Serrano, come back. It's not safe.
And he might like pause and look back at you for a second. His eyes are wide, and his face is glazed over the almost religious mania. And there's just a second where he looks, and then he turns and continues climbing and scrabbling on all fours up into the mist after this person in a costume.
Well, that can't be good.
So do you guys pursue him at all, or you just call after him?
No, he's always been a bit of an odd duck. Help me with Mr. Simon's body. We'll move him up to the entrance, and then we can deal with Mr. Serrano.
All right. Well, Scott, is helping you drag Alan's body back up. It's not very long after Bernie rushes off into the mist that you hear this echoing, inhuman scream out from the mist, and it echoes through the whole valley. It's this kind of croaking, lizard-like sound. And you see Scott just freezes. He looks around again, and he looks down at the spear in Alan's gut, and he pulls the spear out of his gut, and you can see that it has a beaten copper head, and it's got kind of like a carving on the head. So it's this beaten copper blade, and engraved on that copper blade is a snarling serpent head, a fanged maw, and the grip is intricately carved in wood. It's a fairly short spear, somewhat like a Zulu spear, although the artistic depiction is very different from their style. And Scott just pulls it out of Alan's body, and he looks out and he just throws it back down into the mist. And he looks at you and says, "We should get out of here. We should blow it. We should just blow it and get out of here."
For what? Some sort of twisted native that's decided to throw some spears? We've got guns, man.
The Germans were going to blow it. They took the time to wire that dynamite up for a reason. We should blow it.
You want to waste the dynamite when we could use it for the big gold door?
We'll blow this one. There's another gold door. You can come back for it if you want. I want to blow it and never come back. Did you see that? That thing? That Man? Was it a man? Was it a man?
Sure, I'm
Of course
sure it was a man.
Come back to the door. We will deal with Mr. Simons, and then we shall regroup and come in with a plan, knowing about our hostiles, and our guns will prevail us. No savages will drive us from this place. This is the find of a lifetime, the find of the century.
And he like grabs Alan and starts to help drag him, and then you keep talking, and he looks at you like, the find of a lifetime. You're damn right it'll be the find of a lifetime. It'll be the last thing we ever find in our lives. Just like the spear in his gut was the last thing that Alan ever found. I don't want to find anything else. I want to get out of here. I want to go home. The Nazis can stay down here.
Percy draws his revolver and goes, look, mate, I can't let you go up there by yourself if you're not thinking rationally. So, I need to know you're not going to blow that dynamite when we're back up there. So you're either going to stick with us, or you're going to spend some time laying down next to Alan here.
And he just like shoots you this like glare of vitriol, like he's just enraged that you'd ever even suggest that. He says, I don't leave comrades behind.
Well, then quit babbling your nonsense, and let's all get Mr. Serrano's body back up to the doorway here, and we'll haul him out when we're done.
Scott kind of nods. That actually seemed to snap him out of it a little bit. Like you're reminding him of his soldier's instincts. Never leave a man behind. And follow orders. And he does indeed follow your order, dragging Alan's body back up. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to drag him back up into that cavern, perhaps through that golden doorway. And so what is your next move after that?
Well, Billy boy, do you think we go after the odd one, or do we try to poke around somewhere else?
I do not see how we have a choice. We cannot seal him in here. We cannot abandon him, and nor can we turn away from any peril which may be within here. If the Germans, potentially they've found their way out the other side with whatever they came for, and we do need to find what is here.
He abandoned us. We're not abandoning him. He abandoned us. You saw him run off after that thing.
Well, I'm
yes,
not
he did, but he's clearly not of sound mind. It is our duty. We should retrieve him and getting the help he so obviously needs.
So we should join him
rather
in madness?
than leave him. We should bring him from his madness.
There's no hope of that. I've known that since we met him. The military intelligence says we need to bring this guy along because he thinks like our enemy thinks. He thinks like these occultists, but I don't want to think like that.
Well, that's why he's along, isn't he? I guess Billy Boy's got a point. He seemed to know something about what the Germans might have been after down here. I don't see any big field guns lying around, so I guess we go after him. And yeah, I think that's our best option.
I kind of hope this big field gun is just a really good weighted rock you can throw really hard.
So while you guys are discussing this, and Scott might take a little bit of convincing, you actually start to hear something echoing up through the valley. It's almost like a rumbling. At first you think, is there thunder up in that mist somewhere in the vast distance of this cavern? And then you start to hear the squawking, roaring, yowling sound, much like what you had heard previously after Bernie rushed off, and it seems to be growing louder and louder and louder, coming from that open end of the valley.
That's
And
where we were
perhaps
heading
you
before,
hadn't
right?
even noticed. Yes, and that's where Bernie ran off to, and that's where the native ran off in that direction as well.
So is the roar just a constant rolling roar, or?
It sounds almost like a large. At first, you almost want to think that it's like a large group of people yelling and talking and conversing. But as you single out the voices, it doesn't sound like people talking. It sounds like animals yowling, hissing, mewling, roaring, like some kind of enormous herd of very loud animals rumbling closer and closer to you. You hear clicking, stomping, scraping noises echoing through the mist. You're just looking down on this mist-shrouded valley, hearing something vast approaching you, but not being able to see it yet.
We're near the entryway with the ring of dynamite, right?
Yeah, you're in the doorway, between the doorway and the dynamite.
Can I use a knife and maybe cut some of the detonation wire and grab one of the bundles of dynamite?
Absolutely.
Okay, I do that.
Right. You can see Scott sees you doing that. He like shakes his head like, yeah, and he goes and he does the exact same thing. And he might even like start cutting like a few of them off and making a
Careful,
pile
lad,
of
don't
them.
use them all. We need them for the door. Don't forget, we're getting that door out of here, or at least a part of it.
Yeah, and he looks at you and at both of you and says, "So what's the plan? Are we gonna wait? Do you hear that? It's coming right towards us. It's coming right towards us.
That's like got some decent cover.
You've got lots of cover. The door is covered. There are boulders outside. The cave mouth inside has crags and cover. You've got a lot of cover, and you're uphill. Unless you're certainly uphill because you can hear it down on the ground. You can hear it's not flying. It's not climbing above you. So you're uphill. And you've got lots and lots of cover, and you've got bundles of dynamite. He's got a rifle, but
Can we scramble up the hill to where the native was and take cover in that area, overlooking where they think we may be, or even further up, assuming he's reported back? It's
yeah,
obviously a large group.
it'll put you further from the doorway, but you can certainly do that. Yes.
Well, I don't want to be touching
Scott
off
doesn't want to
dynamite
leave the door.
amidst the other dynamite anyhow.
Yeah. Scott doesn't want to leave the door though. Like he's got the rifle. He clearly wants to run and blow the whole thing, but he won't leave you guys behind.
So I grab him by the collar and I start dragging him along with us as William leads the way.
All right,
And
so
I
you
go,
might
look,
start
you can either come with us or you can end up dead like our friend Alan here.
Why are we going further into this place? We should be leaving. You hear that?
They probably
When
saw
they come
us
here and
move
Sorry,
to the doorway. So moving a bit would probably be in our best interest anyhow.
Let's move back through the cave. We need to get out of here.
what's to say this is the only entrance?
And his eyes like go big like saucers. Like he almost starts like hyperventilating.
Percy smacks him.
Because you've activated his imagination, and he's just imagining what could be coming through that fog.
Percy smacks him and says, either make yourself useful or give me the rifle.
Like, he won't let go of the rifle, but he's certainly willing to shoot something. And he clearly doesn't want to fight you physically to like drag him out. So you come out onto this crag, an even steeper part of the valley, and you're looking down, and you can see part of the like goat path almost that led up to the, and as you're looking down, the sound is getting closer and closer and louder. The squawking, hissing, undulating noise rolling through the valley. And then you can start to make it out. This crowd of people, heads, shoulders, spearheads, what look like maces, shields, moving up along that goat path. But as they come up out of the mist, and you see them squat-necked and loping forward with this inhuman gait, perhaps reminding you of lizards, with these enormous hands, these elongated snouts, and it's this huge conglomeration, an army of these man-serpent things.
So from our perspective, can we stay hidden from them?
Make stealth tests.
And give me 30 seconds. I gotta go let my dog in.
Okay. Take a very brief.
So it looks like I got a success on that stealth test. I think you're muted.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So that's one of you. What about yourself, William?
That was a fail on my part on that roll.
Excellent. Do you want to spend a Benny?
Sure, why not?
It's that or fight a literal army.
Nah, still fail.
All right. So yes, you're confronted by this this undeniable mass of inhumanity. The more you gaze into their ranks, the more of these figures you see that cannot be reconciled with a human form, with human biology. And some of them indeed have snapping serpent heads for hands. They have hair of serpentine coils snapping and hissing. Their legs fused and they undulate along the ground. They are the very figures that you have been passing, the images of Yeag, the children of the Serpent God, sealed here beneath the earth. And you see at their head a grotesque figure, perhaps 12 feet tall, a towering giant, and leading him forward, gesturing him onward. You see the small crouched figure of Bernie Serrano, of your occultist friend, and he's pointing upwards, forward towards the golden door. And as he's pointing and gesturing, he keeps looking back, and there's this mad gleam in his eye. And then he looks forward and back, and he's leading them. And then as he's panning through, he spots you up on the ledge, on the rise above, and he raises up his hand and he points, and the enormous head, like some great bull crocodile of this serpent man, swings up, and it sees you as well. So you're high up on the bluff. They have spotted you at this point. So what do you do, if anything?
First question, Percy can see this clearly?
Yes, you can all see this quite clearly.
Okay. Probably.
Well, actually, you have bad vision, but you can make out the
bad vision.
William has bad vision, so he can make out the general outlines of what's going on. He might not know that it's Bernie, but he probably does.
Reasonably certain that this is definitely not people anymore. Is what I'm getting at.
Most of them are close to humanoid, except for their tails. But there are perhaps a quarter of them are inhuman in their writhing, undulating.
Right, so it's definitely not a guy in a costume. Basically, I can't make excuses anymore.
Probably not, no.
Okay, so I probably have to make a fear check at -2. Okay. Doubting Thomas, which I think is just spirit, which good is my lowest ability. So, it explodes. I might actually manage to pull through this. Yeah, I got a 5, so I don't break.
All right.
So I go, Grand, I guess Bernie Boy has made himself some friends.
And what's your reaction, William?
Sorry, DM, I have the Doubting Thomas hindrance too. Do I need to make a roll for that, or is that... Is that what just happened?
I don't believe so. I could be wrong. You probably know more about that than I do, Kyle.
So I just assumed since they're monstrous, it would probably trigger a fear check, and that's what Doubting Thomas is if you are confronted with like undeniable evidence of something supernatural or beyond understanding, it's a -2 fear check that you have to make.
All right. So yes, make a spirit test at -2, Philip. And don't forget, you always do your wild die as well.
Now, what I'm not clear on is what exactly happens if you fail.
I think you probably just panic.
Well,
there is a
that's
table.
A 3.
3 won't cut it. 4 is the magic number. Do you have a Benny to spend to re-roll?
Yeah, I do. I think you get 3, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. This will be my 3rd.
Unless you're lucky or unlucky, but I don't think you are either.
Aha, there's a 4.
Yeah, all right. So you both managed to maintain your composure. But what action do you take?
It's clear they see us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right?
Clear that they see you. Bernie has pointed you out to them.
Righty. Run. Run. Okay.
All right.
Anybody opposed to some dynamite?
So if you're running, make a climb test to see how fast you're able to go. Again, -2 if you want to risk falling.
I assume...
+2. What did I say? +2, yes.
I assume speed is of the essence, so I'll take the risk.
Okay.
Oh, and there's a D6. Is that 10? Was it plus or minus 2?
+2 if you were going quickly.
There's a
Yeah,
12.
so 12, that's a double raise. So he's moving faster than he's perhaps ever moved in his life.
I have been motivated in the correct way.
Rushing back towards the golden door. What about Percy?
Percy, I think, is going to do a couple of things. He's decided he's not thrilled about this army, so he's going to go ahead and give that dynamite a heave after he lights it with his lighter, and then he's going to take off.
All right. So make a throwing test.
Oh, good. Watch me drop this at my feet.
Yeah, if you roll double ones, you drop it at your feet. That's Snake Eyes is a critical fail.
Yep.
But anything short of
I
that.
ran first.
Thank God for exploding dice. So I got a 7.
Yeah. All right. So a 7 is so you're able to throw it with enough accuracy that you can put it down on Bernie or on that enormous hulking brute. Which one do you aim for, or do you just try to get it into the center of the mob?
I think I can just shoot Bernie later, so we'll throw it at the big thing.
All right. So the dynamite goes flying through the air. You know, the hulking, enormous brute has this huge war spear. He's pointed it up towards you guys. The dynamite comes tumbling down, and it kind of like brings its arm up to block it. The dynamite like hits its forearm like pink and just falls down at its feet. And it looks up, and it doesn't know what dynamite is. So it looks up, and you can almost see a smile on this reptilian, snouted crocodile face, as if it's like, you know, oh yeah, that's the best you've got. And it's like almost looks like it's about to start laughing. You don't know what it would sound like if this thing started laughing.
I show him the double knuckles before it detonates.
So before it can start laughing, it's at its feet. There's this tremendous explosion, and it goes flying, tumbling through the air in one direction, and its leg and tail go off in the other direction. There's gore splattered all over the place, and the lizard creatures just recoil in terror, just as their war boss or whatever it was just explodes and goes flying through the air in pieces. And Bernie kind of recoils in fear at seeing that as well. And it's then that you see Scott stand. He aims the rifle down and pulls the trigger. And you see Bernie's head just explode. And Scott quickly reloads and starts firing into the mass of creatures. So we'll come back to William. So William, you're scrambling across the cave.
Just a quick thing. I was gonna run after I threw the dynamite at the thing too, following William. So okay. So I toss the dynamite and bask in the glory of the explosion, and then I take off too. But I probably can't make it as far, being that I've already done something.
Your first turn, I won't get a test for it. You do move some distance.
Okay.
But not enough to make an extra test for it.
Okay.
So I will get a second test from you, William, as I'd assume that you're still moving towards that golden door.
Sorry, there's a 4.
All right. So you're moving not quite as you're slowing down a little because you're scrambling over a rock face at a steep angle, going sideways. So we'll come back then to you, Percy. So make your own climb test there. Again, +2 if you want to risk falling.
Let's see. I have a D4 in climbing. Yeah, I'll take the +2.
All right.
So there's a 7.
All right. So that's a flat success. So you're moving. You're not, you're not falling further behind from William, but neither are you catching up to him. And you can just hear the crack of the rifle, blam, 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 as Scott is continuing to fire into this mob. You see him. You might not even see him. You're not looking back. But he is still behind you, firing to that crowd. So I'll get another climb test from you to see how quickly you're moving.
Do you want one from William first or Percy again?
So yeah, William, Scott is not moved. He's firing into the crowd below. Actually, they'll be snarling at this point. They start to realize the direction of the violence directed at them. And you see, as a mob, they start moving forward, undulating, clawing, crawling up the hill, weapons grasped in hand. Some of them might start to throw javelins. Some of them might even have bows, and they're firing arrows. Their range is such that you're not in any actual danger of being hit yet. But I'll get climb tests from both of you again to see how quickly you're able to reach that golden door to the outside.
So 13.
And I got 6.
Iram's still getting the +2.
Yes, sir.
Can I call back to Scott and tell him to run with us rather than just stand there and die like a pillock?
Yeah, you can yell at him, certainly.
Yeah, that's what I would like to do.
All right. He seems to snap out of it as he hears your voice, and he looks down at the rifle and just drops it and just starts running for his life, rushing after you guys. But he's quite a ways behind Percy, a ways behind you. But at this point, William, you actually come through. You reach the door. It's still been left open. You see the corpse of Alan just inside that cave mouth. So what do you do? You're muted.
Hey, I fixed it. I find a bit of cover in the door, and I pull out my pistol, and I wait for my colleagues, assuming the mob is too far away to shoot him with a pistol. If you can't throw a spear, I probably can't hit anything with a pistol.
Well, you can't miss because there's so many of them. They can miss because there's so few of you. So firing into them, it's virtually guaranteed that you will hit something.
All right, well then I'd like to do that. I'm not a soldier of any sort, but some sort of cover, slow them down maybe.
Sure.
So, and I pulled a 6 on my climb check. And I imagine that Percy's probably at this point has just decided, yeah, I guess we should get out of here, and he's just firing blindly behind him with his revolver.
All right, so you haven't quite reached William yet this turn. So William, you're firing. He's almost to you, but Scott is quite a bit behind you. The horde is now climbing up towards you guys. We're going to say that you're now within range of them, Percy. You're not down under cover, so we'll see if they can land a hit, and they do. I believe a thrown weapon that size will say 2d6. It's your toughness, 9.
My toughness is 5.
All right. So that's a hit with a raise, I believe, which is
Yes.
a wound against you. Do you have any bennies left to soak that?
I have 2. Let's soak.
Okay.
And I got to remember, it's a vigor roll.
Yes, I believe it's a vigor test, and on a flat success, you still take the wound at this level, but you can move normally.
Yeah, I think I just get shaken, right? Is how it works. I don't remember.
I think flat will negate the shaken, but it takes a raise to negate the wound and the shaken.
Okay.
I think.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
That's certainly a pulpier way to do it. If I'm wrong, this is the pulpiest way to do it. So that's what I would recommend.
All right, I got a success.
Just flat?
Yeah, it's a flat success. I'm trying to decide if I want to burn the other Benny or just take the wound and keep going.
Okay.
I think I'll just take the wound and keep going.
Wound is -1 on all future tests until you're healed.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So as you're rushing, scrambling, firing blindly, an arrow soars up, and there's arrows hitting the rocks all around you. But this one actually finds purchase like in your lower back. Oh! And there's this blinding pain against your spine, and it's just sticking out of your back as you're continuing to move and climb. And we'll come back to William. So he's been shot. He's still moving though. What do? Do you keep firing into the horde, Will?
Yeah, V can still, he hasn't been dropped there. He's still scrambling towards the door.
Yes.
As best he can.
Yes.
Then I'll just stand there and try and buy him as much time as I can.
All right. So you'll certainly reach the door at this point, but they are going to get that extra round to fire on you. So again, with a 5, a 9 is a raise. So I think that's another wound.
That's their attack, right?
Oh yeah, excuse me.
So they get an extra D6 with a raise on their damage.
An extra D6.
Wonderful.
So it's 3D6. Hey, 4.
Get out of here.
So you receive a flesh wound. So maybe a javelin, a spear was flying by and it cuts your thigh, but your leg's still working, so you're working it and you're busting ass to get out of there. You now reach the doorway, and the horde is coming up. They'll be within striking distance very shortly. They're within 30 feet of you, scrambling up. You see the foaming mouths, these snouts of sharp fangs. You see the claws glistening and scrambling. Many of them have spears and blunt stone-headed maces. But Scott has not reached you guys yet, so he'll probably take a little while to get to the doorway.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how dead is he?
So they'll hit the door before he does. So you'll be fighting them, and he'll have to fight his way through the horde to get to you.
Okay, so Percy kind of just sprints through the door past, limps through the door rapidly past Billy Boy, and he's just going, damn the door, we're going to blow the damn thing.
All right, and what does William do in response to that?
How much dynamite did you take off the wall? Do you have a dynamite left to throw?
I just grabbed the one.
They may have left because Scott cut a couple off. He may have left one here in the doorway loose.
Yeah,
so certainly could find that and throw it down into the crowd. Now the explosion, I mean, you could hit Scott if you throw it really poorly.
Yeah, I'm reticent to leave him, and I don't know anything about dynamite. Just as a character, I just don't.
Hey, it worked for me. Sure. Percy pulled it off. How hard can it be? Light one end and throw.
All right. Cool. Let's go with it then.
Make that throwing test, and then it's a D4 -2 if you don't have throwing.
I am not even going to look. I don't have throwing. Of course I don't have throwing.
I seriously doubt you have throwing.
Dang. That's a fail.
I think you mean bang.
All right.
Yeah. But I blocked one ear before I threw it, so I'm probably okay.
Now, I wish I had, again, that luck mechanic so Scott could make his luck test, but we don't.
I think it
so
deviates accordingly, actually.
no.
Just roll percentile
Well,
there.
Just roll percentile, though. That's
yeah,
faster.
I'm going to give him a 30% chance. So if we get a 1 or a 2, he's blown up. A 2! Ow! Good Lord! All right. So as you you get it, you light it kind of fumblingly. You go and as you rear back and you start to come through, an arrow comes right next to your head, and you're kind of distracted as you're throwing it, and it goes spiraling, not directly towards Scott, but as he's scrambling through, it lands like a few meters below him, and he kind of looks down, and he looks up at you, and he thinks you did it on purpose. You can see it on his face, and then it explodes, and the rock comes up, and you see the concussion hit him from behind, and his face smashes into the rock in front of him. He goes tumbling back, and he falls backwards down the rock face. It was rolling into the horde, and the horde just descends down on him. You hear the horrible slurping, ripping sound as they're tearing him to pieces and ripping flesh off of him with their fangs. And then we'll come back to Percy. So you're running down the cave. You hear an explosion behind you. What do you do? You're coming up on the point where you see the fucking detonator box, but William's still behind you past the dynamite. What do you do?
Oh boy. It's a good thing Percy doesn't hate Billy Boy. So Percy goes, Billy Boy, you got 5 seconds before the whole thing just goes. So get back here. And I'm going to hold his action until Billy Boy either makes his decision and gets out of there, or
Right.
the horde starts showing up.
Make a I think is there a demolition skill? Make a repair test. I think repair is what would be applicable in Savage Worlds. If you don't have repair, again, it's a D4. You should actually probably get like +2 because of the advice Scott gave you. So
Okay.
I think the plus and minus negate each other.
Okay.
So it's like a D4, and of course you get your wild die if you're untrained.
Yep, I am untrained, so good thing for that advice. And I don't completely foul it up, so I am able to push a plunger.
Well, you've armed it, so the plunger's
that's
ready to go. And then we'll come back to Willie. So the creatures are coming up. They're almost right on top of you. What do you do? They're like 15 feet away from you, moving at high speed.
Look, I know in this game there's a shocked mechanic. I'm just looking at a shaken mechanic. It is.
Yes, sir.
Like, just from a gameplay point of view, would I be fairly shocked by blowing up my mate with a bit of dynamite, or should I just?
I always leave that up to my players. If you think he'd be shocked,
You could do a spirit
you
roll.
could just be shocked. Or yes,
I
if
would
you
be
want to
shocked.
make a roll, then you can certainly make a roll as well. I always leave that up to my players because I hate to infringe on their role playing.
Yeah, no, I feel that would be fairly fitting. So, what was it? A spirit roll, you say?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah, there's a pass for that.
All right.
So you're sad, but
Still currently highly motivated. So I just turn and run.
All right. So you see him running down. I'd imagine you press the plunger as soon as he barely clears the dynamite. Can you both make a flat agility test to see how you fare in the midst of that explosion?
Hey, something I'm good at.
Unless you can think of a better skill to use, but I think agility is most apt.
Yep.
I can't think my way around the ensuing fireball.
I don't think so.
I've got a 7.
I've got a 2.
Do you have any bennies on that, Phil?
I don't think so.
Right.
I'm not a very physical character.
Okay. So Phil, we're gonna give you some damage here.
I'm probably fine.
Another exploding die. I think you're dead.
Sorry, Billy boy.
Yeah. The
Can't
explosion
believe you blew me up.
goes off, and it just shreds his back. Rock fragments come flying through. He's opened up in the back. The back of his clothes are blown off. So of course, Phil, go ahead and if Will has any last words, he's laying there dying with his spine exposed. Does he say anything? Looking over at Percy.
Ow.
And then he just goes blank as death takes him. So Percy, you're left at the bottom of this lightless cavern. You probably still have a flashlight with you, but why don't you narrate what is the ultimate fate of Percy? What does he do with his life after this point?
Okay. So he approaches Billy Boy and kind of just shakes his head and closes his eyes and looks around, makes sure he's still got his pack on him, and pulls the straps up. He knows he can't really go home anymore. It's going to be tough to explain this one to his handlers. So he makes his way up, kind of looks woefully at the golden door as he makes his way past the innermost one and back into the temple. And Percy makes his way back out, goes and grabs into the tent where they of course started this whole mess, and grabs a bottle of whiskey and goes to the camels, ties them together, hops up on his, and just starts drinking himself into a stupor as he rides off into the desert in hopes to find anywhere better than here.
All right. I think that's a very fitting ending to Iram of the Pillars. So why don't you again say to our audience, who are you, where are you from, do you have any product to plug, and then we will end the official broadcast.
Cool. So I'm Kyle. I played Percy Wilkinson. And I don't have any plugs right now, but good game.
I'm Phil. I played William Thompson, and you should play more games.
All right, and thanks to our audience, thanks to our excellent players. Until we see you all again at home, good day and good gaming.